Good evening, everybody. I am Councillor Caroline Culver, Chairman of the Scrutiny Commission. Welcome to this evening's meeting. Members of the Commission present this evening are Councillors Anthony Amitharaj, Dominic Bowick, Paul Dick, Billy Drummond, Ross McKinnon, Eric Pattenden, Justin Pemberton and Christopher Reid. Other members present this evening are Ian Cottingham, who is with us in the chamber, Clive Hooker, who is with us online, B.E. Aloko, who is with us online. Is Howard with us yet? Yes, Howard Wollaston is also with us online, and we may be expecting some other members online also. Also with us this evening are Nigel Lynn, Chief Executive, Paul Coe, Executive Director for Adult Social Care, Anne-Marie Dodds, Executive Director for Children and Family Services, Joseph Holmes, Executive Director for Resources, April Pebbody, Interim Service Director for Communities and Wellbeing, Shannon Coleman Slaughter, Acting Head of Finance and Property, Dave Raitt, Acting Head of Children and Family Services, and also his colleague Carl Davis, Nikki Thomas, Service Lead for Legal and Democratic Services, and Sarah Clark also joins us online this evening. I would also like to welcome Kevin White from Montague Evans, who's here for one of our earlier items. Gordon Oliver is the clerk for the meeting. The meeting is being live streamed via YouTube and Vicky Phoenix is the Zoom host. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube so members of the public are able to follow proceedings. Please can I ask everyone participating in the meeting to make sure they switch on their microphones when invited to speak directly into the microphone and to switch them off when finished speaking. If we hear the fire alarm this evening, we must leave the building immediately via the emergency exit. The assembly point is the Dolphin car park. If the lockdown alarm sounds, we will remain seated and await instructions from officers. We will adjourn the meeting until such time as it is safe to proceed. Do members have any questions about the way in which the meeting will be conducted before we proceed? No, thank you very much. Do we have any apologies, please, Mr. Oliver?
Yes, Chair, we have received apologies from Councillor Jeff Mays and Councillor Billy Drummond is present as a substitute, and we also have received apologies from Councillor Heather Codling.
Thank you very much indeed. So now we go on to the minutes. So we have two sets of minutes this evening, one from the 14th of September. Do we have any comments on that, please? No, do I have a proposer? Councillor Pattenden, thank you. Seconder. Councillor Dick, thank you very much. All those in favour? Yep, thank you very much. I shall sign that. Thank you very much. And we also have the minutes from the special meeting we had on the 11th of October about Thames Water. Are there any comments on that? No. Okay. Do I have a proposer for those minutes, please? Councillor Dick, seconder. Councillor Pemberton, thank you very much. All those in favour? Yep. Thank you very much. I shall sign those. Excellent. Thank you, colleagues. Actions from previous meetings. We have an Excel spreadsheet in the papers which outline the various actions that have come forth from previous meetings. I am conscious from the minutes that we had quite a few actions from Thames Water. So I think we maybe need to just cross-reference that and make sure that they're all in that document. Does anyone have any comments on item 3? Yeah, Councillor Wollaston.
Being very picky, but libraries is not libraires.
Thank you. It's quite ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Councillor Wollaston. Any other comments? There's just one other thing I was going to mention. I know at the health scrutiny, or actually, no, I think it was health and wellbeing, they talked about council tax and looking at reductions in council tax and also how council tax debts are recovered. And Councillor Macro spoke to me about that. And my understanding is that there is a mental health action group which is due to have a meeting about council tax and debt collection, which I've been invited to as chairman of Scrutiny. So I think we probably just need to add that into the action points as well, just to make sure we don't allow it to fall off the radar. But I haven't heard anything else about that, but I know that Councillor Macro is on top of that, so no doubt I'll hear more from him in due course. Okay, declarations of interest. Councillor Pemberton.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Agenda item 7, fostering in West Berkshire. As some fellow members in the chamber tonight and also council officers present will be aware, I am a foster carer registered with the Children and Family Services team at West Berkshire Council. So I'll almost certainly be impacted directly by some of the proposals being discussed this evening. So with your permission, I'd like to remain in the chamber, participate in the debate. If there is anything to be voted on, which I'm not sure there is, I'm happy to abstain with your guidance. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I think that would be fine. No doubt we can benefit from your experience, Councillor Pemberton. So thank you for that. Any other declarations of interest? No. Okay, thank you very much. Petitions. Do we have any petitions, Mr. Oliver?
No, Chair. We have not received any petitions.
Okay, great. So we're getting through this. That's good. Agenda item 6. So this is the call-in that we've had. I'm just going to read out some notes here so that you know how we're going to deal with this item. So if you will indulge me on that for a moment. The Scrutiny Commission has been asked to consider a member call-in of the Executive Decision EX 4402 concerning the Property Investment Strategy Review. The call-in was made by councillors Dominic Bowick, Paul Dick, Clive Hooker, Paul Kander, Ross McKinnon, B.E. Loco and Howard Wollaston. I'm going to invite Councillor Ian Cottingham, Executive Portfolio Holder for Finance and Corporate Services, to give a brief overview of the proposed course of action in relation to the Property Investment Strategy Review. Next, I will ask the members who called in the decision to present their reasons for the call-in and their proposed alternative course of action. I will also invite them to indicate why they feel the decision is contrary to the Council's budget and policy framework. I will then invite Joseph Holmes, Section 151 Officer, and Nicola Thomas, Deputy Monitoring Officer, to advise the Commission as to why they consider the matter is not contrary to the Council's budget and policy framework. If, having considered officers' advice, members consider that the matter is contrary to the budget and policy framework, the matter will be referred for consideration to full council without further debate, in accordance with Rule 5, Part 7 of the Constitution. This would require us to have a vote. If, having considered officers' advice, members consider that the matter is not contrary to the budget and policy framework, the call-in will be reviewed by Scrutiny Commission this evening. At this point, I will invite Councillor Cottingham and officers to respond to the points made by members in the call-in. I will then invite members of the Scrutiny Commission to make comments or ask further questions of the Executive Portfolio Holder, officers, or the call-in members. At that point, I can also invite other members who are not on the Commission but were part of the call-in to make comments also. Members are reminded that debate should focus solely on matters raised in the call-in and should not introduce any new points. Members are also reminded that if they wish to discuss any matter that relates to the Part 2 Executive Report, which is in our agenda pack, then we will need to pause the debate and vote to exclude members of the press and public for the remainder of the item. The Scrutiny Commission has the power to make the following decisions regarding a call-in. A, confirm the executive decision. B, propose amendments and refer the matter back to executive for further consideration. C, having taken advice from the Council's monitoring officer and Section 151 officer, the Commission may refer the decision to Council if it is of the opinion that the decision is outside the budget and policy framework approved by the Council. Does all of that make sense? Okay, we'll see how we get on. So first and foremost, I will invite Councillor Cottingham if he would like to make some opening comments.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Councillor Culver. So yes, this particular decision is being called in. I will be very quick in my sort of summary over why we arrived at this particular place in time. So we're all well aware in this chamber the financial pressure which West Berkshire is facing to make sure we have a balanced budget in 23-24. So we've been looking at various options of balancing the books, but in reality, this is not really the primary reason why we're looking to divest our property portfolio. So what we're looking to do is, in essence, really comply with government policy. So government policy states very clearly that local authorities should not take undue risk with taxpayers' money. In our opinion, being a commercial buy-to-let landlord is taking undue risk with our taxpayers' money. Purchasing assets, borrowing against those using the Public Works Loan Board, which at the time we borrowed at 2.5%. So yes, that was a really good rate of interest. We have been very fortunate, and I commend the actual investment strategy previously of making a diverse portfolio regarding where those assets were bought in the country and the types of those assets. However, since those assets were bought 5-6 years ago, we have seen a decrease in the prices of those assets on the open market. And we see this as being a strategic review to actually reduce the risk of exposure to the ratepayers, the council taxpayers of West Berkshire. So very, very clear, we see this being both an aspect of reducing risk, but also in line with what the government have been telling us with regarding using capital receipts to ensure that we hit a balanced budget for this financial year and also years going forward. And as I say, capital receipts, which we have for the sale, allows us to use the investment of those monies rather than borrowing at the current Public Works loan rate, which I believe is now 5.7%. Sorry.
I don't have the very latest, I'm afraid, Councillor Cox.
However, so that there will be a financial saving of using those capital receipts to reinvest for the people of West Berkshire, rather than, as I say, investing in assets which are all across the country and also will require capital investment sinking fund. I think over the next 10 years, there will be at least £2 million required to maintain the assets at their current state of affairs. So hence the need, as I say, to reduce risk, but also bring those capital receipts back for the benefit of residents, council taxpayers of West Berkshire.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cottingham. Members who brought us the call in, would you like to speak now, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you very much, Councillor Cottingham, for that summary. We've called this in not so much because we disagree with the reasoning that Councillor Cottingham's put out there. And in fact, the reasoning that he's just explained, you can disagree with it or you can agree with it, but there is a logic there. That's not why we've called this in. We've called it in really because, well, for a few reasons. Having a publicly stated and explicit strategy to disinvest from the entire portfolio by a certain date, we feel puts the council at a severe commercial disadvantage when negotiating disposals of assets with potential buyers. Coupled with the fact that in the executive paper itself, financial projections were included, which indicated that the properties could be sold at a significant capital loss. We feel that the decision to publicise that strategy really ensures that the council is going to receive millions of pounds less than they otherwise would have done. There was some issues around the wording of the paper that, we've said this in the call-in letter, that there was an error in the financial description. There was a description that savings from the disposal would be 6.9 million annually. That's not the case. It was cumulative savings over the life of the MTFS. During the debate, more than one councillor expressed a view that they didn't really quite understand the financial implications of what was going on. It's likely that members of the executive would have experienced similar difficulties as well. So there's that issue about the publication of the strategy. It's sort of showing your hand to the buyers, which I think could cost taxpayers millions. That was the first thing. And then just as we were composing the call in, this question about whether the executive actually had the competence to make that decision sprang up, and it would appear that they did not. So, now, Chairman, you can stop me here because I'm getting onto the budget and policy framework aspect, and I'm not sure that's what you want me to be doing right now, or should I just carry on? Yes. So the budget and policy framework is part of the Council's constitution, and it reserves explicitly the property investment strategy to full council. And I'm quoting from the framework here that any in-year changes to the framework can only be made by the executive in very narrow circumstances. And those circumstances have not been met in this case. I have had some correspondence with the monitoring officer over the last few days, which indicated that she feels the executive didn't actually make a decision to change the property investment strategy, which is certainly news to those of us who sat through the debate and actually are listening to Councillor Cottingham tonight. So there's a bit of confusion there, and I'm looking forward to having a very good debate about whether the executive actually had the competence to make that decision in the first place.
Thank you very much, Councillor McKinnon. Can I go to Joseph Holmes now, and also Nicola Thomas, to see what comments you would like to make? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And if I just go to the last point around the can the executive make the decision? So I will say this paper could have been clearer to say that it's heading to full council, but all of the property investment strategies previously have gone to full council. That's where this would be heading. This is where it's tending to head. But I will take that we could have made that clearer. If you look at one of the recommendations, it starts off with, council to do something. That was the intent of where it's heading. And to the point around the change of the framework, in essence, nothing changes on the framework until there is a sale, until something does change. So the council will continue to generate receipts and have to look after those properties and have those duties until there are any asset disposals, of which obviously in part 2 there is a proposal there. But until anything is actually transacted, there is no change within what happens within the property investment strategy.
Would you like to say something?
No, I think Mr. Holmes has covered it for my aspect. It's acknowledged that the paper could have been more clear about the fact that the change to the strategy is going to council in February, I understand. So actually executive is not making a change to the strategy itself. In terms of the change in strategy, I understand it's not intended to be implemented until council consider that and have a full debate in February. So at the present time, there isn't actually a change in the strategy.
Okay, so as I'm led to believe this was always due to go to council anyway, it might have been useful to have known that, executive. Councillor McKinnon.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to come back with a couple of questions, and thanks to Mr. Holmes and Mrs. Thomas for those comments. At no point in that paper did this mention that this was on the way to council for a decision. At no point at all. At no point during the debate was it mentioned by anyone. And I was quite scathing in my criticism of this change in strategy, as Councillor Cottingham is well aware. At no point did any executive member or any officer tell me that a strategy wasn't being changed by executive. I'd like to ask Councillor Cottingham, did he know that? Because I'm not sure that he did. And this looks very much to me like a position that's been put up after the fact. So I'm not happy with that. Mr. Holmes mentioned the recommendations in the paper. I've got them in front of me here. The recommendation says it is recommended to members that. Now, members you could take as executive members or council members. It doesn't mention which one, and then just goes on to say disinvest in the portfolio over the medium financial term in order to generate capital receipts. I think the executive thought they were changing the strategy on the 2nd of November. This is news to me that they didn't do it. And well, if the strategy hasn't been changed, well, what are the executive doing at the moment? Are they acting in accordance with the current strategy, which is to maintain the properties for yield, or are they actively seeking to disinvest from it? If they're actively seeking to disinvest from it, well, they're acting against the strategy that's part of the budget and what's the word? The budget framework. I'll say that. It's a real mess, Councillor Culver and everyone else, and I think we need some clearer answers on that.
I don't know if it helps, but the Property Investment Board, within its terms of reference, which were included in the original paper, actually provide for the Property Investment Board to dispose of individual assets. So they would be able to do that regardless. The change in strategy, as in to disinvest from the property portfolio, is being considered at council at a later stage, which is what is recommended. So I'm sorry if that wasn't clear, and we'll take that forward.
Mr. Thomas, sorry, where was that recommended in the paper? The fact that council was going to decide that?
It should be more clear, but it's in the recommendations that the council disinvest. So it was meant that council, the meeting, as well as full council rather than West Berkshire Council. I accept that the wording should have been more clear to ensure that both members making that decision and members of the public were clear on where that decision making was taking place.
Chairman, could I ask Councillor Cottingham to answer my question from earlier? Did you know this?
I'll be straightforward, answer to your straightforward question. This is all new news to me, what's happened this evening. So apologies if I did not pick that up at the time.
I will just make one comment. I know the paper that went to executive, at the top it said committee making decision, said executive. Now, did it say that because it was going to the executive, or should it actually have said council because that was its final destination?
Yeah, I mean, it as its final destination, it should say council. That, you know, so as I said before, the paper should have been clearer where this ends up. It has always gone to council. An executive on many issues gives a view on what it wishes for the future on a range of schemes. But absolutely, it should have been clearer on where this was heading.
Chairman, could I also point out that the forward plan for this item lists the ultimate decision maker as the executive, not council. So it's not just this paper that's unclear. The forward plan itself lists executive as the decision maker.
Okay, thank you for that. So we've established it is going to the full council. Councillor Berwick.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm quite concerned about the way that this has unfolded this evening, and I'm really worried that the executive's alacrity with which they decided on disposing of the disposal of the portfolio is really jeopardising our the capital receipts that they might have expected to enjoy. It's quite hubristic the way they've gone about this, and nothing that Councillor Cottingham said in his presentation tells me why the administration have changed their minds over an investment strategy, which they applauded when it was brought in back in 2017, and which was always intended to be a long-term strategy. And I understand the argument. I hope that Councillor Cottingham's not going to rehearse the arguments that we've already heard about the need to realise capital receipts. But the whole point about the strategy is that over the long term, it would ride out the rises and falls.
Councillor Cottingham.
So what I'm going to, in response to Councillor Berwick's comment, is that in my earlier statement, I commended the fact that we had 100% occupancy, 100% rental income. I think we're all in agreement that the economic climate is totally different now than it was 6 years ago. After we met with Montague Evans on Friday, I think we all saw in the press that Lloyds Bank are cutting 2,500 people workforce. We had a very clear presentation showing that retail rental is falling, office rental is not strong. We're also seeing the whole commercial property portfolio, sorry, the whole commercial property rental sector heading for stormy waters. So if our property portfolio was in line with the industry average, which is roughly 70% occupancy, we would find ourselves with a property portfolio which is not covering cost, i.e. the cost of servicing the debt, the cost of paying the MRP back, and we'll be in a scenario whereby it would actually be costing us money. So we actually see ourselves with the good fortune, as I say, of divesting, reducing the risk exposure. If Councillor Burke believes over the next 10 years that we have 100% occupancy, I would be very, very surprised.
Councillor Dick and then Councillor Loco.
Thank you. As a new boy, I'm still not really grasping the emphasis on the political sides here, and I think we're getting a bit lost. We've heard apologies from officers, and that is good and open. We've heard apologies from the last speaker, and that is good and open too. But Madam Chairman, at one point in your skillful summary of what might happen and what could happen, you put it back, the suggestion, well, if people aren't happy with what's been decided and the net effects, what are the remedies? And that's the question I'd like to come back to, because I'm speaking on behalf of my ward members and indeed all the people of West Berkshire. However we got here, we have risks. We will lose potential income for sure in a time when we can't afford to. So what does the party in power suggest that they can do to help ameliorate the situation? Thank you.
At this point, I just want to ask officers' advice, because we were due to look at whether or not this is contrary to the budget and policy framework and have a vote on that. And then if we decided that we should go on and debate the other issues in more detail, we were to do that secondarily. Can I just get advice, now that we know that this is going to council, how should we now proceed? Because we've got a different situation on our hands to what we thought we were going to have this evening. Yeah, I'll just let Councillor McKinnon come on this, and then I'll come to the other people who had their hand up.
I think we're being told here, Chairman, and thank you, that actually no decision was made at the executive at the start of November. I think that's correct. In which case, how were we able to call this in if no decision was made? I'm not sure how that tallies. And what are the executive going to be doing? Well, this is the second point, but are they going to be continuing with the current strategy, or are they going to do the old one? But I think the key point is, how on earth are we here if no decision was made, and how are we only discovering this evening?
Okay. My inclination is that we just get on and we discuss the whole call-in, and then it's going to go to full council anyway, and it will get debated by everybody then. I'm not inclined to, stop the debate and say, well, it's going to council anyway, so that's it. People happy to proceed on that basis?
Very happy.
Yeah. Okay, great. So Councillor Loco.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, because I don't know if you can see me because I've got my video on, but I can't see any pictures. But anyway, if you can hear me, thank you very much, Chair. I think Councillor McKinnon has pretty much said quite a bit of what I wanted to say in terms of how did we get here. And be that as it may, that we've caused something where there's no decision being made and it's supposed to go to full council, it calls into question really the integrity of what we want to take forward. For me, this approach is laced with so much prejudice that I cannot see how we can have a meaningful, robust discussion around this, bearing in mind the numbers that we have. And I find myself looking at a situation where an unapproved decision or non-decision, whichever way you want to look at it, has become public knowledge without it being approved, has weakened our position in terms of what we can get from the potential disposal of these properties, which hadn't been approved in the first case because it's a change in strategy, which is one of the issues that I had with this. Because when we have a strategy that talks about a medium-term forecast, right, if you're going to change anything, you have to tell us what you've changed. And if you're going to change it, then that's a change in strategy. That's why it's called an MTEF, right? It's a strategic position that we have taken. And the fact that we are here today, for me, really, whichever way this goes, this debate is laced and filled with all kinds of prejudice. In my position, in my view, that there's no way we can have a meaningful debate around this, that the only sensible thing to do with this kind of situation is just to maintain the status quo. Because to go ahead with this, there's actually a consultation that's gone out on the basis of a decision that has not yet been made. People are going to be consulted on what has not yet been approved. It makes a mockery of the whole process. It really calls into question the competence of this executive to cope with what I call significant decisions. This is a very serious issue, Chair. And I'm so, I don't know what else to say, really, at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Iloko. Councillor Berwick.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Councillor Cottingham. I understand your arguments. I don't wholly agree with them, but that was not the point. That wasn't what the point I was trying to make. My point is about the speed with which you turned around, publicised your intentions, and jeopardised the capital receipts that we might have enjoyed. So that's it.
Sorry, can I clarify my answer then?
Yeah.
So when local authorities 5-6 years ago went into the market to purchase commercial assets, it's around about just below 4% of the total market of purchasing. And we've been reassured that the publicity over selling will make no difference to the actual price of what we sell. No difference at all, because the process will be that it will go to a open sale, it'll go to a data center, where people will be able to download the various items, and then in essence will then make an offer. And if the price is not a price we want, it will not be disposed of. Quite clearly, it's not a fire sale, it's not a sale at any price. And in fact, next day we did have a couple of offers coming in. So, and part of what you're saying about publicising our strategy, we have to publicise the actual book value price of our assets anyway, by law. So it's there. And what we were trying to be, as an administration, is being transparent. So it's counterintuitive. So on one hand, you want us to be transparent, and on the other hand, you don't want us. What do you want from us?
Okay, Councillor Wollaston.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't want to go over what's already been said by other people, but it's not just a question of being transparent, it's a question of not being naive. I'm sorry. I've, as you possibly know, spent 40 years in the commercial property market, and I'm 10 years out of date, so I took the precaution of speaking to a number of people I know, and they all said they are advising their clients, and unless you really need to sell, don't sell now, because you're at the bottom of the market. And I also noticed from a press release that came out from the council today that the need for capital this current financial year is only 1.5 million. So I just question the whole timing of what's being proposed. And I just think the executive has not thought this through. Frankly, timing could not be worse.
Thank you, Councillor Wollaston. Councillor Kander.
Hello. Just in response to, I think it was Councillor Hooker's previous answer, I'd like to see the research that actually stated that by exposing the fact that you plan to sell by a certain date does not affect the sale price. Because whether you call it a fire sale or not, it is time stamped. At the time when as Councillor Wollaston has just pointed out, at a time when the economy is such that actually the worst thing you should be doing is selling right now. So I'd like to see the research, because frankly, I don't believe it. And if you couple that with the fact that the press release that clearly, if a decision or no decision has been made, whatever that is the situation, the fact is that the press release clearly has led everything and everyone to the conclusion that this is a fire sale. So if the decision wasn't already made, then someone should have control over the press releases by this administration.
Thank you, Councillor Kander. Any other comments? I am conscious that we've got Mr. White with us from Montague Evans, and he has made the effort to join us this evening. I don't want to put him on the spot, but if anyone has comments for him, yes, Councillor McKinnon.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks very much, Mr. White, for joining us this evening. Just a couple of questions to you on this. Were Montague Evans asked for advice on the timing of the disposal at all, and if so, what advice was given? That's my first question. I've got a couple more if you don't mind, but I'll fire that one at you just now.
Thank you very much. We had a specific question that was posed to us by Pip, which was how could we best find £10 million through selling some or a multitude of the assets? We went through an exercise on that was based on current market conditions, the asset management plans for each of the assets, and considering what the approximation of those exit values might be after all the costs were taken. That was the instruction.
Thank you. So the parameters really of the advice was, we want to raise 10 million, how best to do that from within the current portfolio?
Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you. Two more, thanks for me, Chairman. As interest rates begin to come back down at some point in the near future, all else equal, would you expect then to see a rise in capital values of commercial property?
You'll forgive what will sound like a political answer here. It's incredibly difficult to speculate on that. The right time for any funds to sell is the right time for that particular fund or property owner. That is usually about the cycle of the investment strategy. Lots of funds at present, for example, are overweight in property, so they're putting money into gilts and things. So it means that they sell assets. Equally, other funds have redemptions and they sell assets. So it's about ultimately where the owner is in their cycle, less about where the investment market is.
Yeah, so I was just thinking about the effect on cap rates. If all else equal, and I completely accept what you say, there are other factors at play, but in a static external environment, as rates came down, I would have thought that cap rates then come down and capital values would tend to rise. But I appreciate you're not keen on saying yes or no.
I can't say so. I guess what I can talk to you about is property valuations. So very broadly speaking, the approach to the yield that somebody would put on the value of an asset is a colloquially called all risks yield. That's a metric of risk-free. So what's a comparable gilt, plus a property risk, plus an illiquid asset risk, plus the specifics that might sit around the length of lease, the location of the property that are very micro. So that's how you build it up. So you might argue that if gilt rates fall, then that would pull down all of those approaches.
I could talk about this all evening, given I actually teach real estate investments in my day job, but I'll finish it off with one more. Where Montague Evans asked to give advice on the wisdom of publicising the strategy with a specific end date. I take Councillor Cottingham's point about the announcing the sale doesn't affect things, but I think if buyers know that you have to sell by a certain point, is that something you were asked to advise on, and if so, what advice was given?
If I could give the answer in two parts, that's okay. We weren't asked specifically about that. It is relatively common for those sorts of things to happen. So Landsec, for example, announced recently they were going to sell down assets. But what we did do is say that if you start to sell assets, then that creates a difference in risk across the portfolio. And therefore, logically, you might think about divesting over a certain period of time so that you don't just start to bunch up risk in very few assets if you start to divest.
Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, for that. Any other questions, comments from anybody? Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to point out one comment. I'm not an expert in property. I'm not claiming that I'm qualified to argue in terms of others have said. One thing struck me was it was called out as naive approach or a kind of like not thought out approach. On the contrary, I see this as like we are in a financial distress that's been stated. and UK economic growth forecast is not good either for the next foreseeable future. That means at least for the next 4 years. And Bank of England has said that recently the interest rates are not going to come down anytime sooner. So if I'm looking at the position from a taxpayer's perspective, I would be looking at a fair deal for the residents when the interest rates are not coming down. We have a portfolio of asset which is kind of come down in value. Would I not be like looking at options, not just selling? I'm not going into the specifics. I'm just looking at the approach by the executive, and Councillor Contingent said it's an approach. They've come up with, the executive have come up with a transparency and put out the thought process that we will be coming out of this financial distress by selling out this asset, which has clearly come down, and there is no way this will be a kind of a loss because there is lots of figures given there. So I just want to point out that it's not naive approach. It's not silly. In fact, it's a very transparent approach. And I see that this if it goes through the process, it will give a fair value to the residents. And I think that's what residents would expect from us, not to kind of have a political bias to say we should not be selling assets. No, it should not be like that. That's my view. Without taking any political position, I see this as not fair comment on the executive. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Matharage. I saw Councillor Pemberton, then Councillor McKinnon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Like a lot of members in the chamber tonight, I'm relatively new to this as well. I've only sat through a few of these Scrutiny Commission meetings, and I must admit I'm still learning very, very quickly the nuance of sort of council procedure and standing orders and the Constitution. It is definitely a learning curve. We seem to have got ourselves into a really unfortunate position by whatever reason that we are debating a call-in tonight that hasn't happened. And I can assure you I've got lots and lots of opinions on what the executive are proposing to do. I just wonder whether this is the appropriate forum to air those views, because do you know what? What I do know is that whatever happens tonight, it's coming back to full council. If we decide to sell some properties, it's coming back to full council. So do you know what? Let's get all 43 members in the room and we'll have a proper debate then. Following on the point that my colleague just made a moment ago, look, we can have a debate about the pros and the cons of this. Again, what I do know is that this council is under a huge amount of pressure to provide statutory services, non-statutory services, whatever that may be. I would suggest in the current economic climate, what the council doesn't want to be is a buy-to-let landlord. I could be wrong. Again, people have got different opinions. There is obviously a basis upon which the executive has chosen to make this decision. And one final point, if I may, if it assists Councillor Bowick, he made the comment earlier about, once upon a time, Lib Dem members were supportive of this strategy. Well, unless I'm mistaken, this strategy was agreed back in 2018. In those days, the Lib Dems had 4 members. We've now got 28. The current administration might have a different opinion. Guess what? Times change. The economic climate now is very, very different to what it was 5 years ago. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Pemberton. Nikki Thomas just wanted to come in, and then I'll come to Councillor McKinnon.
I was just going to clarify the point of why this call-in was allowed. And I know under the new administration, all the budget proposals will go through scrutiny in any event. It's detailed in paragraph 3.6b that this property investment strategy will be considered as part of the investment and borrow strategy going to council in February. And I just wanted to say that this call-in was allowed to have a proper and transparent debate around the property investment strategy, whereas the overall investment and borrowing strategy may not have afforded you that opportunity. So that's why the call-in today was allowed.
Thank you, Councillor McKinnon.
Thanks. I'm not sure I fully followed that, but I think that's something I'll pick up with you after the meeting. Thanks, Nikki. I just wanted, and apologies for coming in again, there's just a couple of points that have come up that I think need addressing. Firstly, the financial distress that the council is in. selling off one of these assets right now is not going to alleviate financial distress if that is indeed the situation that we're in. And being a buy-to-let landlord is netting the council 1.3 million net profit right now. It is alleviating financial distress, not contributing to it. And we're going to be giving all that up by selling the commercial property. And then finally, this point about transparency. Yes, I want this council to be as transparent as possible. I'm not sure we're getting that with the justifications for why this is or it has or has not been a decision made by executive. But yes, we want transparency. But there is a reason why we have part 1 and part 2 meetings in this council and across the UK local government sector. Part 2 exists where there's commercial sensitivity or commercial considerations, which means that the proceedings and the discussions should not be transparent. And by telling the entire commercial property market that you need to sell all of your assets with a hard deadline cannot possibly be seen as being commercially sensible. Now, that is a textbook example of when the council should not be transparent. We're not talking about not being transparent to residents. We're talking about not being transparent to the people we have to negotiate with to try and get best value for the council. Sometimes it makes sense not to be transparent in the case of commercial negotiations. Just a couple of points I wanted to finally make there, Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Pattenden.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to clarify, and maybe the officers can clarify, whether this, given that the discussions earlier about, is there a decision or not a decision that was made, and what's the implications of that? Whether the call-in is actually valid today, and whether we, whether it's something we need to consider now. Can we just have some clarification on that?
Yeah, what I would say is Nicky Thomas mentioned that the call-in was allowed so that we could have a debate about it, which we might not possibly get at full council. So if that is the case, I would suggest that tonight we propose some things that we would like executive to consider or reconsider ahead of a paper going to full council, because they might like to take some of that feedback on board before something goes to full council. Obviously, we'll have a vote on that. So if the members who've made the call in say we would like executive to consider X, Y and Z ahead of it going to full council, then we can have a vote on that. Because my understanding is we're not going to get.
I was just going to clarify that it's been agreed by the administration that the budget will come to scrutiny. And my point is that the changes to the investment strategy is only one part of the whole investment and borrowing strategy that's going to council. So you've got a number of elements. So it's to enable the fact that we are disposing an individual property to be debated fully if members wish to today. But that obviously needs to be in part 2, so I'm being quite careful.
No, so we're not going to go to the part 2. Okay. Councillor Cottingham, I saw your hand.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to pick up on one point which my colleague Councillor McKinnon stated, that we were going to sell all property. I cannot recall that statement ever being made. What we were given, what we endeavoured to do was to have the option of divestment. We never ever stated that all properties were going to be disposed of over the short term. There was a plan over, I think, over a 3-year period. We never stated it was going to be all properties at once, which by inference your statement gives. And secondly, my second statement is, when the council came to buy these assets, didn't we publicise that we had a new strategy and would be purchasing? So the contradiction of your argument is that you stated to the market that we were in the market to buying assets, and conversely, we've just been transparent by saying we're actually looking to divest.
Thank you, Councillor Costigan. Councillor McKinnon.
Thanks. This is turning into finance tennis, Councillor Cottingham. Second point first. When the council announces it as a strategy to acquire commercial property, it is looking at a commercial property universe in the UK of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of different properties. When the council announces it's going to sell all 8, it's announcing it's going to sell all 8. The effect on the market is nowhere comparable, but nice try, I would say there. The second point, I'm looking at the recommendation. It is recommended to members that the council disinvests from the commercial property portfolio over the medium financial term in order to generate capital receipts. Disinvest from the portfolio. That's all the properties in my book.
Okay, Councillor McKinnon, yes, Mr Holmes.
Thank you. I said someone would forget using the mic, and it was me. Yes, thank you, Chair. I suppose just a sort of couple of points which make an observation on is obviously this is kind of the policy intent of the exec that we've been discussing. It came up around kind of the sort of financial distress was mentioned of the council. We see the paper later on the agenda on our Q2 position. But the use of capital receipts and the flexible use of those for transformation purposes is in there as one of the mitigations in the later paper. And to this being, I suppose, the new approach of the executive, if I just sort of read out from the budget that was set in March in the Appendix D to the capital strategy, it said the council is reviewing its assets and regularly challenging the purpose of assets, including in the council's commercial property portfolio. There may be opportunities in 23, 24 and beyond for asset sales to fund greater transformational activity. So I suppose just making that point around some of that sort of continuation of some of the executive proposals.
Thank you. We've had quite a debate on this. Councillor Dick, I will come to you, but then I think we need to make a decision about how we go forward. Thank you, Councillor Dick.
I will assist. Thank you to my colleagues across the table for what they said, and I agree with the vast majority of what you both said, gentlemen, except to go about the sale the way we've gone about it will not bring the best value for our residents, full stop. And I've already said this earlier. Can we get into a discussion about what can be done differently going forward to ameliorate this loss? We're never going to regain it, ameliorate the loss and do better for the taxpayer. If we're not going to have that discussion about, I love ancient history. I studied it at university a few years ago. We're not going to learn from that. What are we going to do differently going forward, Madam Chairman? And if no one wants to engage in that, then we might as well move on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dick. So in 3.4, we've got a summary of the call-in. And basically, if I might be so bold, just to basically summarise and say we should stay as we are as a council with our current strategy. Can I suggest, unless I'm contradicted by officers, that we have a vote on that first and foremost, that the scrutiny committee thinks that we should stick with the current plan and have that as a first vote? And then go on to say, okay, we think that we ought to give this feedback to executive, which can then go forward to council. And this is what scrutiny thinks should be looked at again. Would that be an acceptable way forward?
Yes, because the new strategy can't be implemented until full council has voted on it until February. So it's actually not controversial. It shouldn't be controversial.
No. Okay. Okay, Councillor Dillon, welcome.
Hi all, apologies. I'm trying to find a quiet space in London, so I've been off camera because I've had the phone right to my ear so I could hear all of the debate. Hopefully you can hear me clearly.
Yes.
Lovely. So I do have some concerns about the constitutional niceties of the call-in if the decision hasn't happened. But I am obviously more than willing to hear from scrutiny about what you believe. However, just referencing back to Mr. Holmes's point, which was in the March papers, which said we may disinvest in 23-24, actually is therefore in line with current council strategy. So as much as Councillor McKinnon and his Conservative colleagues want to posture that we've done the wrong thing, one could argue actually we're following their route. I still contest that by publishing the values in the executive paper was correct, and have been published every year in the annual reports. And look, let's be frank, if we don't receive best value or an offer that we're willing to accept, we won't accept it. So we will be protecting councillors' taxpayers' money, Councillor Dick, and we won't be looking to sell off assets on the cheap. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, Councillor Dillon. So taking on board what Nikki Thomas said, I take your point. There's no point in voting on 3.4 because the decision hasn't been made. So saying let's not make, yet fine. Do we want to, bearing in mind also what you said about the fact that we might not be able to debate it in a lot of detail at full council because it's going to be about the whole property investment strategy and not just this element. Could I make a suggestion that we make some recommendations for what we would like executive to consider ahead of that paper going to full council, and have a vote on that? Would members be happy about that? And then that would help inform executive decision making ahead of that meeting. Councillor McKinnon.
I think that's a very good idea, Chairman. Thank you. I'm sorry that the leader felt the need to make a political intervention there. I think things were progressing quite nicely and until that rather strange intervention. I propose actually something that's along the lines of what Councillor Cottingham said earlier on. Councillor Cottingham said to me that certainly in his interpretation, executive had never intended to display a strategy or to indicate a strategy to get rid of all properties by a certain date. I think that's what we've been asking for all along here. We've currently got the status quo ante policy in place because executive, it appears, did not make a decision to change it a few weeks ago, so that's fine. When it comes to council, by all means explore disposals, but let's not have a stated strategy to get rid of everything by a hard deadline, which I think is what Councillor Cottingham was telling me he thought he was proposing in the first place. And I think if that's a position we get to, I don't think we've got a problem. I think we've got full agreement on that.
Okay, so if we can have a vote on that then, would that be acceptable?
Sorry to be pedantic, but you need to have it proposed and seconded.
Okay, so just so we're clear on what we're proposing, we're going back, Scrutiny Commission is going back to executive and saying that we recommend that there is not a hard and fast date for when these properties might be disposed of. And that is our feedback as a commission. Yeah, Councillor Amathara, Shiva.
Just to clarify, is it the point about just the hard deadline, or are you suggesting that the executive decision in terms of the decision not been made, but the approach to disinvesting or divesting is a strategy that can be followed through or thought through, and then it can be discussed? Because I am getting a feeling that divesting itself is a wrong approach and it's a naive approach. I've heard that is not true. And if you accept that one, I'm clear myself in my head that, okay, as long as we get a fair deal for the residents, and leader has clarified that, and Councillor Cottingham's clarified that, if we get a fair deal and it's not a fire sale, we are looking at divesting as an option to sell off our assets to get a fair deal from that because of the factors involved. Right. So that's what I wanted to clarify. So we are agreeing to that as well.
Yeah. Well, my understanding is that is what the administration are going to be proposing to full council anyway. But our point is, do we want to say that there shouldn't be a hard and fast deadline for the disposal of those assets? I want to try and draw this to a close. Councillor Kander and Councillor Pattenden and Councillor Powick, is this a point of clarification before we go to a vote? Councillor Kander, I saw your hand first.
It was, because what we're saying is not only the hard and fast date, but also the fact that it's all divestment completely. It's naive if we say we're going to sell everything and it's by a hard and fast date. So if we're saying that there's a strategy to potentially sell some, not all of them, or potentially sell, not all of them, and not within a certain date, then I think that's better.
Okay, just a point of clarification here from Nikki Thomas. The current Property Investment Board terms of reference do say that there is delegated responsibility to Section 151 officer to divest anything up to £15 million, and they have that as a delegated responsibility. So we just need to note that. Sorry, Councillor Pattenden and Councillor Dick, and then I think we need to move to, yeah, thank you. Councillor Bowick.
That was the point that I was going to make, that it's already in the gift of the executive to dispose.
Okay, fine. So the point we want to make is we don't think it should be done by a certain date.
I'd be happy with that, Chairman. Yeah, I think we don't actually need to announce a strategy of divestment at all, because as Mr. Holmes and Councillor Cottingham have said, PIP have always had that that power. But as long as it's not all of the properties by a particular date, that's something that I think we can absolutely live with.
Okay.
But so of course it's only advice for the executive.
Okay. So are you happy to propose then, Councillor McKinnon, that we don't ask for?
So proposed, yes, thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Oliver, have you got a note of that? Yep, thank you very much indeed. Seconder, Councillor Bowick, thank you very much. Shall we go to a vote on that? All those in favour? Yep, that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Good. So I think that brings us to the end of that item. Thank you very much. Could I thank Mr. White very much indeed for coming along this evening? And you are free to leave now unless you want to stay for more. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Right, moving on. Item number 7, fostering in West Berkshire. Councillor Codling's not able to be with us this evening because she's unwell, although she might be online, I'm not sure. Officer Dave Rate is going to do a presentation for us. So we have a report in our agenda pack and also the PowerPoint slides, and we're now able to see those on the screen. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just thought I'd set the context for the report that you're going to scrutinise. So when children come into the care of the local authority, our first preference is to place them in foster care, either with a connected person or kinship care, or else in in-house fostering placements. And you can see the types of care up on your screen. Particularly tonight, we are interested in what's called in-house fostering. So that is foster care provided by foster carers that we recruit. But there are other ways that care is provided to children. We do really well in terms of the fostering offer. So the proportion of children fostered in comparison to independent fostering agencies, we have around 75% of our children in foster care who are in in-house or kinship care. That compares nationally to around 46%. So that's very strong. The process where someone is recruited to a foster care is they would phone up or they would make an online inquiry. Go to the next slide. And then we, within 24 hours, would give them a phone call. That would ascertain whether they've got some of the requisite elements that are required. For instance, a spare bedroom. So you'll find that a number of people who express an interest aren't able to proceed much further than that. Within 5 days, a social worker does an initial visit and covers a variety of matters there. For the foster carer to progress, we undertake some training called Skills to Foster. In fact, there's a course happening tonight at Shaw House with prospective foster carers. As they progress through, we have a social worker who undertake a comprehensive report. That will then go to panel. And the panel, if they approve the foster carers, will say what age range they can foster and for how many children they can foster. And then on an annual basis, those are reviewed. There's a similar sort of process to kinship carers. So these would be carers, often a relative, grandparent, uncle and aunt, who are offering to care for the child, and we will do an assessment process for there. In terms of the data and trends, we have a variety of processes that are involved. So you can see that we had 55 inquiries made from January to today. Of those, we did 25 initial visits. We've sent 23 application packs, and we're anticipating that we'll have 13 foster carers approved by the end of the that year.
Let me just turn this off a bit. I'll do that.
Oh, sorry.
Oh. Councillor Wollaston, you need to mute yourself, please.
My apologies.
Thank you.
I'll carry on. In terms of the retention, you will see on the next slide that previous year, we had more foster carers who finished than we acquired, but in this current year, we've acquired 13 new foster carers with 6 leaving. When we have foster carers leaving, that's often for a variety of reasons. Some are positive, so that those carers have applied for a special guardianship order and they have converted, or that their child has become 18 and they convert to staying put arrangements. So there are some positive reasons why a foster carer might finish. There are others who they lapse because they haven't looked after children or they resign. In terms of the regional comparisons, so conversion rates, next slide. We're at sort of mid-range. So we have around 16% of our initial inquiries who finally come through. There are some fostering agents, some local authorities who are more effective and some are less effective. We're, as I say, mid-table when it comes to that. And then the last slide. We're doing a lot of work in terms of raising the profile of fostering. You hopefully will have seen banners around, you'll have seen postcards and backdrops. We've got fostering in one of the local football teams. There's a variety of different ways that we're trying to promote fostering in the area. Coming to the paper itself, the paper proposes a variety of mechanisms by which we're looking to increase the number of foster carers. The 5 proposals that are articulated in the paper, one is around creating a dedicated resource, staffing resource, who can push and promote foster care recruitment in the local area. We're looking to introduce an employee support care policy for council staff and then get accreditation with the fostering network to call ourselves fostering friendly. We're suggesting that we review the remuneration and allowances for foster carers, including whether there is any council tax reduction as an incentive for people to foster locally. The independent fostering agency market, we're looking to see if we can encourage others into that area so we have a wider pool. And then lastly, we are committed to taking part in a regional fostering recruitment partnership with the other 19 local authorities in the area. What we know about foster care is that the outcomes for children in foster care are far better than the outcomes for children in sort of often more complex arrangements in terms of residential. Not every child can be fostered, so some do need residential care, but we know the outcomes for children in fostering are far superior to others, and they're actually cost-wise far cheaper. So it is effective not only for the children but also for the local authority. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Mr. Rate. So we are looking at the proposals that have just been summarised and deciding what we think of those and if we've got any feedback that we would like to give. Councillor Dick.
Thank you, Chairman. Very simply, I applaud every single word in that report and the people behind it and the team behind it, because in my life, I've seen too many situations where there's not been the level of support that a scheme like this will support and encourage. So congratulations to all. Thank you.
Thank you. I would echo that also. Councillor Pattenden.
Yes, Mr. Rate, you mentioned that outcomes are better for children that are fostered. Maybe you can kind of elaborate on that. What sort of outcomes? What are the benefits?
So the stability that foster carers provide is incredibly important. Last night, I was in here with a group of 9 of our children in care. And I said, look, what's the most important thing to you? And one of them said to me, having a good mum and dad. And I said, what do you mean by that? And they said, somebody who looks out for me, somebody who cares for me, someone who's interested in me. And so foster carers provide that stability and that framework. They provide an opportunity to show love, care and attention in a way which is much longer lasting. They essentially are de facto parents for that child, and it's incredibly powerful. And you can see when you hear the anecdotal stories from our children in care, the difference that makes.
Thank you. I'll just ask the question myself, if I may, and then I'll come to Councillor Matharage. paragraph 4.3, there's obviously quite a big difference in the cost of a child being in foster care as opposed to being in a care home. Do we know how many children would qualify for that, essentially, would be able to go into foster care and don't need to be in a care home?
So the number of children who we wouldn't place a child into residential unless they needed it or unless there was no other placements. So there are some children who we have currently in residential care where we would look to step them down. And so at the moment, I can think of probably 5 children where they are in lower cost placements, and we are actively seeking foster placements either in-house or with independent fostering agencies. But there's a huge shortage at the moment, hence this.
Okay, do we have any sort of number? Because it would probably be useful to us to know exactly how much saving we would be able to make, because there's quite a big gap between the care home cost and the fostering cost. So
For those children, they are the ones who are looking to step down are off on average. We're probably between £3,500 and £4,500 for those children. The average cost, which you'll see within the report of 6,300, is for all the residential care. And you'll have some really expensive ones, and it's very, very hard to move them, step them down. They often would have sort of 2-to-1 staffing, and we couldn't step them down into foster care. But there are some who've been stabilised, and actually we could move them in. So, yes.
Okay, so we don't have a number for that. It's probably not. No, okay.
Not at the moment.
No, I'll move on. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Ray. Councillor Matharaj.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions and suggestions as well. Thank you, Mr. Wright. First question on this one, the proposal, first one says like creating a dedicated staff resource. I appreciate and applaud that one, because having a dedicated staff would kind of have the focus on the recruitment and the process. My question is, how do you think like this, having a dedicated resource would improve the timelines or having this timeline squeezed or make it better? Because one of the most discouraging things for foster carers, potential foster carers, is the timelines. It's like the time it takes to kind of close the process. How do you think like this recruitment of this person, dedicated one, would help us in that?
Thank you for the question. Having dedicated resource does enable you to just be quicker and more focused in on that, rather than having to add it on to other matters. So there are the skills to foster course is a certain length in time. There's certain things we can't squeeze, but there are other matters. So normally it would take about 7 or 8 months from initial inquiry through training, assessment, and foster panel. We might be able to squeeze that down by a couple of months, but there are still certain fixed times that you'd have to adhere to.
Okay, certainly your answer is it will improve.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're looking at improve. Chair, if I have a suggestion, one more. Thank you again for highlighting the numbers, and so West Berkshire is doing better. What I'm suggesting is that I know for a fact that the foster carers are eligible for childcare provisions, and with the next year rule change or the childcare provisions for working parents, would that be applicable for working parents to claim the 30 hours if they foster a child? And would we consider that as a kind of like option to give? Because
yeah, absolutely. So foster parents would also they fit as any other parent in terms of if they're caring for a child who is eligible. Absolutely, they would be eligible as well.
Okay, and one final one before I stop. I know in my ward, a person, at least one, been having a refugee child in their home, caring for them. Would having a refugee child in their home would be considered as foster care, or would be a separate criteria? This is just my understanding, because it will encourage more people to come forward and take refugee children, particularly children, in their care.
Okay, so if it's an unaccompanied asylum-seeking child who is placed in the area, they would be placed by us, and if they are under 16, we would place them in foster care. If they are over 60, if they're 16 and 17, we often use supported lodgings. If they are coming with their family, so there's a whole family and it's, I don't know, Homes for Ukraine or something, that's a different set of arrangements. However, we know that we've approached families who were in that scheme to say, look, you're no longer offering your home for Ukraine, but would you like to be foster carers? And again, some interest that way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like a little bit of clarification because I'm not too clear. So if you go into foster care, you're a looked after child, is my understanding, so you get the support and funding. But if I was to foster, say, a nephew or a niece, that would have to go through special guardianship order. Is that correct?
Not quite. So there are what's called private fostering arrangements. So if you made an arrangement with a family member, which was private, had no involvement from us, we would want to know about it, but it wouldn't feature here. It's where we are removing a child because they are unsafe in their home environment and then approaching a relative and saying, would you care for them? That would then come under the kinship care or connected persons fostering arrangements, at which point we would have to go through a process of both assessing and regulating that.
If I may just follow. So if you go through the kinship arrangement, do you get the same support and funding?
Yes, you do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bowick.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Rake, for a really great paper that you brought to us this evening. I'd like to just remind members here that the real focus of the paper is about recruitment of foster carers, and we could spend hours here this evening talking about the world of children in care. And I use that term advisedly, children in care. We don't call them looked after children, and there's a whole lot of background to that. Yes, so I think we absolutely need to improve the remuneration and allowances that we offer to our foster carers. I think the proposal that we participate in regional fostering recruitment partnership, I think is a great idea, and I really want to see that go forward. A couple of points. I'm not convinced about the dedicated staff being a member of the team. I think perhaps we should think about, if it's a full-time job and rather not a job that's shared by the team, perhaps it should be in HR, just a consideration. And I do worry about the proposal that there's some relief on council tax, and we've spoken about this before, haven't we, Carl, over the years. I think it could set a difficult precedent that we might regret later on, because there are all sorts of other constituencies, if you like, who would ask for similar support. Rather than give them council tax release, just give them more money.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Bowick. There was one thing I was going to make a comment about the job description, actually. It says that it would be essential to have experience of using social media platforms, but desirable to have worked in recruitment or marketing. I would envisage a job like this very much being somebody who goes out into the community and has a lot of quite detailed face-to-face discussions with people and really builds up a relationship of trust, and that is probably more essential than the social media. Because at the end of the day, if you're not particularly familiar with social media, you can chat to the IT or the communications team and say, look, here are some appropriate pictures, here's some appropriate text. Can you do something with it that will make it interesting on social media? But I would think that the face-to-face development of relationships and trust is going to be absolutely key to this, to my mind. Any other comments from colleagues? Any other views on the council tax that Councillor Bowick mentioned, whether we think we should just pay them more? The remuneration proposes an uplift of 5 or 10%. I would suggest that it probably ought to be at the upper level of that. Any other? Yeah, Councillor Pemberton.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really reluctant to get into the debate about reductions or removals of council tax versus paying foster carers more, because I think the key issue is that it's the lack of remuneration and allowances that's caused a lot of the problem in recent years around recruitment. I know there are other issues as well with regards people retiring and leaving for different reasons. I mean, before I became political, I actually wrote a cost of living letter for the West Berkshire Foster Carers Association, and presumably it landed on a desk in Children's Services somewhere saying, can we have some more money, please? The reason for that is obvious, but it's important to kind of say it out loud. Foster carers, you know, the allowances are good, but in some cases they don't even scratch the surface, especially with the more specialist placements where the carers can't work or there are other issues flowing on from that. When I read this paper, actually, I was surprised to find out that we'd been given a 3.5% increase in April. I must have missed that. I need to read my remittance statements a bit more closely. There's another 3.5% going in next April, which is great. Again, it doesn't scratch the surface. That 3.5% that foster carers got this year would have been the first increase in 5 years. They didn't get anything for the previous 5 years. If you were in a job and you didn't get a pay rise, you wouldn't accept that. And, you know, foster carers often have to deal with quite challenging circumstances. So I fully support the recommendations in this report. I think it's great. How we do it, I'm not bothered, but let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw Councillor Cottingham, then I'll come back to you. Yeah.
It's just a small point, following on Councillor Bowick's comment about giving either council tax reduction or more allowance. It's just that not everyone's tax position is the same. It might be that if you give people more money, they end up paying more tax. It just needs to be clarified. Not every case is the same. So by giving a council tax rebate, they actually might be better off than giving them more allowance for the same amount. So it might cost the council a little bit more. But it's, as I say, not every person's tax position is the same.
I saw Mr Davis's hand, and then I'd like to bring in Ms Dodds, if I may, because you might have some pertinent points to make on this as well. Mr Davis.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that whatever we do, we have to be competitive, and particularly in this area where we're surrounded by other local authorities, unitaries, we're all fighting for the same pool of people a lot of the time. We're advertising in the same places, and we have to be in the market. And so whatever we do, we have to be as good as, if not better, than everybody else.
Thank you very much.
And it's not just about money, it's also about the kind of supports that foster carers get on a day-to-day basis from the team. And that I think that offers very good.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Ms Dodds, do you want to make some comments? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, members, for your support and enthusiasm that you've shown the subject tonight. It's good to know that you're behind us in what we're trying to do. I just want to really re-emphasise some of the points that Dave and Carl have both made there. The first one, and the most important one for me, is I think West Berkshire are performing very well with the numbers of children that we have in foster care, period, but exceptionally well in terms of the number of children that we have in in-house foster carers. And that is testament to the support that foster carers receive, because we can talk about remuneration because it's there and it's tangible. But actually what foster carers that leave foster caring often say is it's the support that they receive from their social workers and from the teams that they're attached to that turn them off fostering. So it's excellent that we're having a net positive gain in terms of our foster carers. I think the dedicated recruitment is essential in terms of our next steps. I think there is some merit in exploring marketing or HR professionals. I think probably the marketing is even more important than the HR tilt on this, because it's getting people through the door, and it's not that process of recruitment, and that's not diminishing the part that HR will play in it, but it is absolutely promoting the marketing of fostering as a choice for adults. I think, and it's the point that Carl has made, we could increase allowances, but that may go unnoticed by foster carers. But one of the real big ticket items in authorities or organisations that are successful is around that council tax reduction, whatever that might look like. So I think going forward, it is worth a much more detailed understanding from foster carers about what they would see as most beneficial. And I think picking up the point that Councillor Cottingham makes as well in terms of the tax thresholds and what that looks like, I think needs to be taken into consideration there. But I think in summary, we are in a strong position. We want to be in a stronger position. I would want West Berkshire to be the authority of choice, and particularly appealing to our residents that they want to foster for West Berkshire in West Berkshire, as opposed to foster for West Berkshire through an independent fostering agency that's local. So I think the more we can do and the more we can promote, I think the stronger the position will get. But thanks to colleagues in the fostering service that we've got foster carers that want to stay with us and work really hard for our children. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you very much for that contribution. Any more questions, comments from members? No, okay, so we are happy to note the report. Thank you very much for your presentation. Best of luck with the work you're doing on that, and congratulations for what you've done so far. And hopefully the minutes of this meeting will give you a record of some useful feedback. Thank you very much, everybody. Right, moving on to item 8, Equalities, Diversity and Inclusion Framework. Is Councillor Dillon still with us?
Chair.
Wonderful, thank you, Councillor Dillon. And we also have April Pebbody, so over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm presenting this paper on the new EDI framework on behalf of Pamela Voss. Pamela is our EDI officer, and unfortunately she was unwell this evening, so she was unable to join us for the meeting. I will obviously endeavour to answer any questions that you all may have this evening. So the purpose of the report is to present a new EDI framework for agreement, including the new equality impact assessment. Following the recommendations set out in the paper in 2.1, I would, in a second, like to open up to questions and comments. I would just like to say, as part of looking at the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Needs Assessment paper that you will have all received, I did note that there were some slight anomalies in the data. So I have had that now corrected. Our public health data analyst has reviewed the complete document and has just made a few minor changes to that document, and we will be sending out a updated needs assessment and inclusion needs assessment with the minutes from the meeting today. So I just did want to bring that to your attention. And if anybody has any questions or comments with regard to the papers.
Thank you very much, April. Councillor Dillon, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Sorry, I'm adding to. No, I don't, Chair. Just keen to hear if members think that anything else should be added to the strategy or not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Did everyone hear that? If we've got anything we'd like to add to the strategy framework, basically. Okay, great. Councillor McKinnon.
Oh, so thank you very much, Chairman. A couple of points on this one. I was really taken aback actually by paragraph 8.5. So this is on page 104 of the pack. When towards the end, it talks about talking about Stonewall accreditation. I'll come back to that in a second, but it says this will align with one of the goals of the newly elected Liberal Democrat administration to demonstrate that West Berkshire is a good place to work. I have never seen in any reports for executive, for council, for scrutiny, in all of my years as a councillor, a reference to a political party. And I'm really surprised to see this now. Now, West Berkshire being a good place to work, of course, that was one of the priorities of our previous Conservative administration, if we're going to bring political parties into it. Well, of course it was, because the new administration put our priorities through a thesaurus when they're coming up with their own strategy. And I'm sure it's a priority of Green members and our Labour member as well. I'd just like to ask, what happened there? Are we starting to talk about political parties in council papers now? Maybe that's just one for leaving rhetorically in the air, but I wouldn't like to see that going forward, Chairman.
Okay, I could give my own view on that, but I won't.
That's
We'll move on. But yes, thank you.
Can if you like, but it's your meeting. I do have an issue, and perhaps this is a question for Ms. Pemberty as well, about the Stonewall accreditation. It looks like there's a desire here to progress towards being Stonewall accredited. In recent months, various large organisations have left the Stonewall Diversity Champions scheme because of concerns about perhaps going too far in certain areas. I'm talking about the Equality and Human Rights Commission itself, the BBC, Police Scotland, University College London, the Ministry of Justice, and the Department of Work and Pensions. They've all left the scheme recently. And I think that's in part because of Stonewall's chief executive, who has publicly compared those who disagree with the charity's approach to trans issues and gender critical views as being akin to being like anti-Semitism. In an interview published on the BBC website, she said that gender critical views, the belief that sex is binary and immutable, were so dangerous and bigoted that they should be silenced. And Stonewall's definition of transphobia includes, amongst other things, defending the current wording of the Equality Act and defending women's legal rights to single-sex spaces and sports. And an independent report has recently said that following Stonewall's advice puts an employer at risk of committing unlawful discrimination itself. So I would be very, very reluctant to see West Berkshire pursue that accreditation, and I wonder if the executive would consider that going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. I don't know, April, did you want to come back on that, or should we just move on to more questions and points? Yeah, I'll move on. Okay, thank you. Councillor Matharaj.
Thank you, Chair. Again, a detailed report and well thought out, covering all aspects. Just wanted to pick up one point on supporting our armed forces. I don't think any second thoughts here in this forum, or why did that we should be doing more. But just pointing out that under the Armed Forces Act 2021, we are obliged to support the armed forces, their applications and membership and all those funds. But I'm trying to see if I missed it, sorry. In subsequent section, there is generally only reference to armed forces, the armed forces station at Denison Barracks and community there. Is that what I'm inferring right, that we would be supporting the community, armed forces community through that barracks, or just a wider membership where returning servicemen and women from armed forces are to be supported in West Berkshire? Wider, yeah. And follow up on that one, do we have a database? Or what I'm trying to ask is, like, they come from the service, they retire here, for example, do we have an engagement with them on an ongoing basis, or have a database and link with them to support them for their needs? How do we?
Apologies. So I'm not 100% sure about the answer to that, but what I do know is that as part of this work, what we would want to be doing going forward, we already are engaging with our communities, but we would absolutely be wanting to make sure that we engaged with that population, to make sure that we are talking to them, finding out more about their needs and making sure that we meet their needs. So going forward. So
yeah, that is exactly
100%. That's what.
Thank you. That's where I'm coming from, because they may not be necessarily themselves coming forward and talking to us. It would be, we should be like having that link and then finding out who's retiring, coming back from service, and then having, okay, thank you.
And we do have an armed forces champion as well. I'm not sure who that is at the moment. I think it was Andy Moore before. I'm not sure. Yeah. Do you know who it is now, April?
No, but I will follow that.
Okay.
Follow that up. On that point of champions as well, one of the things that we'd be really keen to do is to have EDI champions across the council, and hopefully have a member that would be keen to become an EDI champion as well, so that we can do much broader work. But I will find out who is our armed forces champion.
Yeah. It's Caroline Richardson.
Sorry, Chair, it's not. It's the champions are councillors. It's Councillor Stephanie Stevenson, who is a former captain, I believe, in the British Army.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dillon, for that. I'd just like to make a point actually on page 150. No, that's not the right page. Beg your pardon, page 104. We talk about disabilities and about the need for educational, health and economic opportunities. I think it's also important to emphasise social opportunities, because I'm very conscious about the amount of isolation there is at the moment for disabled people, as well as able-bodied people and people of all ages. I know that often in the media, there's talk of isolation amongst elderly population, but it's also a problem for younger people as well. Cuts to youth services, for example, give them less things to do. So I would be keen if we could also make an emphasis on isolation and the social benefits of doing more for those people as well. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Bowick.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Pebbody. The paper starts off talking about equality and diversity, inclusion, and then we go into the two reports that are pending. And there's an awful lot of mention of equity. And as far as I know, equity is not an aspect of the Public Service Equalities Directive. Yet we see on page 209 that a statement that PSED requires equity objectives. There's a big difference between equality and equity, and I want to know what our direction is here, because achieving equity is perhaps a almost insurmountable goal. Nobody can do it. So could you comment on that, please?
Yes, so there is a difference between the equality and equity, and I suppose we should be trying to achieve equity wherever we can, because it's trying to provide a more even playing field for people, because we may have access to services, we may have a service, but does everybody have equal ability to be able to access that service? And that's the difference between equality and equity, in that you're providing, making sure that people can access services. So you may have a service that's available, but if you don't have transport or a means of getting to that service, then you wouldn't have equity in being able to access that service. So I think they're both really important.
Thank you. Councillor Boat, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to lead into a wider debate, because equity and equality are different quite fundamentally, and we could be setting ourselves goals that we will never achieve, and perhaps even may not want to achieve. And I'm not sure what how we've settled on this direction. Yeah, previously we never had mention of equity in our EDI strategy, and here it's riddled. This paper is riddled with equity.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Reid.
Maybe I could address some of that. So I've two children who've got severe dyslexia. To help them to read a huge document, often putting it in a tabular format allows them to scan the data and absorb that a lot quicker. That will give them a degree of equity rather than just being given a huge pack of data, 388 pages, everyone gets the same. So equity is achieved through a number of different and easy to achieve methods. Just give you an example.
Councillor Pattenden.
Yeah, I certainly don't have a problem with aspiring to equity. I'm surprised Councillor Bowick isn't interested in aiming for it. He said he thought it couldn't be achieved and might not even want to be achieved. So you know, that sounds a bit like he's not interested in equity. I think there's huge inequity at the moment, and it's incumbent on us as a council to do whatever we can to reduce it.
Councillor Pemberton.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the reports, Ms. Pebbody. I'm actually quite glad that you mentioned or touched on transport in one of the most recent responses you gave to another member. These kind of documents are always great because they're aspirational and they're full of the things that we want to do and see and achieve. And, you know, of course, we all want to applaud that. Turning specifically to paragraph 8.3 on page 103 of your report, it talks about transport initiatives before effectively saying, but actually we definitely can't do that because we haven't got the money. Now, that will come as no surprise to me. It'll come as no surprise to my colleague, Councillor Cottingham. Are you disappointed by that? And do you think really we probably should be doing more to pump some of the transport initiatives across the district, especially in rural areas where some villages don't even have a bus service?
I think some of that might be about how we deliver our services. So sometimes if people can't get to one place because the service is delivered there, it might be about how we take a service out to our residents and out to our population. So I think there are other ways of doing it if you don't actually have access to transport.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Dillon and then Councillor McKinnon and Councillor Bowick.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm more than happy to take on your suggestion looking at social isolation, although I do think that there may be other strategies within the council that can address that. But coming on to Councillor Bowick's point about equality versus equity, equality is about individuals or groups of people being given the same resources or opportunities. But equity is about recognising that each person's got different circumstances. And so it's about allocating the correct resources so they have the opportunity to reach an equal outcome. And I know Councillor McKinnon said I was making political points earlier, but actually I think this is a political point. I think it's a clear difference between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives in what we want for our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dillon, for that. Councillor McKinnon.
Thank you. I know Councillor Bowick's big enough and handsome enough to defend himself, which I'm sure he will. Just come back to Councillor Reid's point. Look, thanks for that example that you gave, Councillor Reid. Now, I would have thought, and again, I'm happy to be educated here, and perhaps we could do with some clearer definitions about these things. But I would have thought the case you described there about someone with severe dyslexia needing some special equipment to help them to digest the document. To me, that's thoroughly wrapped up in the word equality and equality of opportunity. And in order for that person to have the same opportunities that someone without dyslexia would have, then they would need that extra assistance. I think that's where certainly Councillor Bowick and colleagues would be coming from. Again, it's a really disappointing political partisan thing that the leader's just gone on there. Must be a general election coming up. But I think perhaps when we're looking at EDI policies like this, and Dominic, Councillor Bowick's right, this word equity just does appear, and it's being talked of as being something that we need to do. What's the difference? Because certainly my conservative principles are thoroughly behind equality of opportunity of exactly the type that Councillor Reid just described. So before we start throwing political brickbats, I think we just need to all know where we stand with the definitions, I think, and then we can move forward.
Well, maybe we could suggest that there's either a glossary or some kind of, in the introduction, it explains what those issues are and what the differences are. Councillor Bowick.
And thank you to members for helping me out with the difference between equality and equity. Equality is well defined already in our strategies. Equity is an ambition which is not really well defined and sits on a spectrum which kind of runs off into infinity if we allow it. And my concern here is that we're setting ambitions that are simply unachievable. And I'll give you an example. In the action plan, there was an action, there was a concern that there is inequity in representation here in this chamber, that certain communities or people with certain characteristics are unable to achieve the lofty goal of representing their friends and neighbours in council. Well, I'm not quite sure what is expected of the council in addressing that matter, and even if it's realistic or even legal, because at the end of the day, there is a process already by which people come forward for representation to represent their residents, and it's called elections.
Which probably begs the question whether political parties need to do more in this regard as well.
That's a fair comment.
Yeah. April, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I suppose it just got, and we've had quite a good conversation about the difference between equality and equity. And I suppose as hopefully if you read through the documents, there's, okay, this is what we need to do. And then there's that aspiration that we're trying to say that we want to go a little bit further with some of the groups that we want to reach and we want to work with and the communities that we want to hear and listen to. So I think it is within that context is that there is that equality is obviously what we want to achieve, we're striving to achieve, but we've got that next level where we might be able to start really trying to level out that playing field to give our residents that opportunity to be able to access things in the same way. So I think there is a difference, and there's that aspiration to go to the next step where obviously where we can.
Thank you very much for that. Can I just ask on page 201, it talks about how we engage with LGBT, disabled communities and so on. Could you just very briefly summarise for me how we do already engage with those communities in particular? Because I have a lot of residents with disabilities who come to me with concerns about not being able to find work or social isolation and so on. So it would be quite informative if we knew how that is done already.
So we have just recently done some events actually for LGBT families at the museum, some specific activities and events that we put on in terms of some of our work within adult social care around supported employment, areas like that. I don't know if Paul wants to come in say any more on that and the work with in adult social care.
Thank you. Yeah, so a little bit. So supported employment is a good example where we give targeted support to people with disabilities to try to get them into employment. Naturally, an awful lot of what adult social care does is absolutely intended to account for people's additional needs, whether that's physical disability, learning disability, mental health, etc., and support them to engage in their community. A lot of the requirements under the Care Act are about supporting people to participate in their local community and enjoy a successful life.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments, questions? No. Okay, I'm sure Mr. Oliver scribbling away with all of our comments and suggestions there. Can I just say thank you very much to April Pebbody, because she wasn't expecting to have to do this tonight and stepped in for a colleague. So very grateful for that. Thank you. And for answering all of our questions. So that was just to note. Thank you very much for that. Right. Moving on, item 9, Revenue Financial Performance Report Q2. Could I invite Mr. Holmes, please, to present this for us?
Certainly, thank you very much, Chair. So this report sets out the forecast for the year-end position as at Q2, middle of this year at the end of September. It's showing a change from Q1 of about £3 million improvement, from a £6.3 million overspend to a £3.3 million overspend. No significant moves, particularly on the sort of global services area. The main shift in forecast comes from looking at our minimum revenue provision policy, but hopefully, certainly on the services side of things, demonstrates some stabilisation. Of course, if we were to have an outturn at this level, we would be below our minimum levels of reserves as were set out in the budget papers. So clearly still really significant financial pressure facing the council through the various demands that we articulate within the report. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holmes. Couple from me, if I may. It's noteworthy that the figure has gone up for the amount of money forecast for 24 to 25, which is 14 million, which is quite concerning. So an increase of 11 million over 3 years to 14 million just for next year alone. So I think we need to make particular note of that because that's obviously very concerning. On page 245, where it talks about 2.3 million of flexible use of capital receipts for transformational activity, can you just flesh that out a little bit for us in layman's terms about what that actually means? How is it that those capital receipts are flexible and what kind of transformational activity?
Sure. Thank you very much, Chair. So, yes, on your point around the medium-term financial strategy and increase in the savings number, that actually there's a report which I think a reference in here, which went to executive last week, setting out the reasons there. I mean, the main reasons from the original medium-term financial strategy are sort of increase in demand and forecasts around model growth in adult social care and children's social care cost coming through. So those come the main drivers in there, but the report from last week has that articulated within it. And then to the flexible use of capital receipts, there's sort of government guidance on what we can use capital receipts for. So usually use capital receipts for decreasing future borrowing cost requirement. And funding through funding the capital programme. But over the last, I think since 2015, the government have allowed councils the flexibility to use capital receipts for certain transformation activities. And actually, the definition is pretty wide, and a sort of appendix was included in the last council papers around some of the activities proposed. The main constraint actually on the council not using more of this previously has been lack of capital receipts, because we're not a particularly capital rich council, say, compared to other councils who have got large amounts of established property. So the definition is broadly around invest to save projects. So if we yield some capital receipts in the current years, and there were some papers which went to November executive on the 2nd of November, the proposal would be to use, say, the sort of £2.3 million. Some of that was planned, and you see in the appendix, we try to separate out kind of like the planned amount and the new amounts. And the new amounts, a large one in there, for example, is around one of the budget investments for the current year budget was investment around recruitment and retention payments for children's social care workers, for instance, which would then, the aspiration behind that budget investment was to reduce agency costs. So I'm quite happy that that's an investor save project. That was quite substantial. That was nearly £1 million. And then it also enables us to use capital receipts against, like, the projects team, the digital team, for example. So areas again where the council is trying to reduce unit cost and sort of change things in the future. So I think I might have included a bit of a link in either this paper or the executive paper, which went last week around to that guidance.
Sorry, thank you for that, Mr. Holmes. Councillor Matharaj.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. In one of the recommendations, 2.2, it says to note the implementation of measures. I would in fact go further to say we will commend the measures taken by the executive and officers in implementing the efficiency around recruitment, staffing and agency, because that's a lot of focus around. So I would definitely commend the measures being taken. Just a question on that one, Mr. Holmes, like how you are seeing this measures getting into kind of effect and benefiting us in terms of savings in the next few years?
Thank you through you, Chairman. So thanks, Councillor. Now, hard to say how in the long term those measures will change, but just to give an example on agency costs, for example, so in a 4-week, the same like the last 4-week period, if I compare the most recent 4 weeks to 4 weeks a year ago, our agency costs have been about £580,000 over the last 4 weeks. The same figure for the previous year was just under £750,000. So I expect for Q3 to see the agency costs starting to reduce across the council. They've come down a little bit between Q1 and Q2, but for most of Q2, that was just when the sort of financial review panel was starting. So we've been successful in a number of permanent recruitment. We still have a substantial amount of agency staff, especially in children's social care and parts of adults, but there has been more work around ongoing permanent recruitment. Again, actually, it's linked to the point the chair asked earlier around transformation projects. So in the budget in the current year, there was a proposal which was accepted around transformation work in HR to try and get more sort of localized work to help more permanent staff. So that probably on the agency side of things is absolutely where we've seen quite a significant improvement through some of the measures included within here.
Thank you. Councillor Bowick.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. You mentioned earlier on about using capital receipts to invest to save in transformation projects. And then on page 250, 5.18, in respect of children and family services with the £3.7 million overspend, this is forecast after the use of earmarked reserves, mitigations, and the use of transformation funding of £787,000. So what's going on there that we're using transformation funding to address the overspend?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. So there was the point I made before around there was an investment in this year's budget around enhancing the children's social worker package to get more permanent staff in to reduce our reliance on agency staff. And so that's that figure highlighted in there.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure if I understand. The forecast is after the use of earmarked reserves of 87,000, 179,000 pounds of mitigations, and then the use of funding of 780. That doesn't read that it's an investment that's going to generate savings.
Sorry, through the chair again. So no, that's the amount that was, or the majority of the amount that was set as was the investment for the current financial year. The additional cost of the recruitment attention allowance. So I'm saying we can use the flexible use of capital receipts because that is transformational activity, and so that therefore then reduces the overspend position.
Thank you for clarifying that, Councillor McKinnon.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Holmes, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions about the agency staff. So the table talks about a saving in terms of agency staff. I'm looking at page 243. So it's I think it's a £41,000 a week saving from April to September. I just wanted to ask, is there a seasonality factor with agency staff? Would we always expect to see a constant or a pretty consistent number of agency staff throughout the year, or would we expect it to dip between April and September?
Yeah, so I'm looking at a graph that obviously I can't share on the screen at the moment. There are absolutely some peaks and troughs. So if you think like December is normally probably a lower value month because there's more bank holidays during that period, so expect to see sort of less agency staff in there. Looking that there are some ups and downs, but the figures I quoted, I'm quoting like for like, and certainly over the last year, there are some weeks of further ups and downs, Councillor McKinnon, but no huge trend per se.
No, that's fine, thanks. Is the saving in agency staff from agency moving on to full-time contracts, or reaching the end of their contract and then not being replaced, or is it a bit of both?
through you, perhaps as you said at the end, you knew that my answer was going to be. It is a little bit of both. So we definitely have, we absolutely have had about 22 staff who are converted from temporary to permanent, which is great. But absolutely, there's some post holders who have come to the end of their contract. Some of that will be because there might then be permanent staff moving into that post, or other areas where we'll just be holding that post vacant.
Thanks. This is going to put you right on the spot. Sorry, I should have told you this question in advance. But on let's say a typical agency worker in adult social care, do you have any idea how much the saving is, like in percentage terms, between employing them on an agency contract and a full-time contract? Because with a full-time contract, you've got a lot of on-cost there. You've got the pretty significant pension contributions, which will in some way mitigate those savings. So roughly, what sort of saving are you looking at from agency to permanent?
Yes, I will say it varies across the council area as well, on how much the agency increase would sort of on cost would be, especially in those posts where nationally we know there's large vacancies, so social care especially. The uplift can be sort of 30% plus on agency costs. On a established post, say we've got national insurance and pension costs on most posts, and annual leave, etc., etc. But some of that it doesn't account for all of that differential at all. So, and especially in some of our posts, it's higher than 30% as well. So, yeah.
Two final things. One is a question, one is a glib political point. So I'll do my proper question first. Any idea how much is being spent on planning neighbourhood notification letters so far, on the postage of those letters? That's not the glib political point either. That's the genuine question.
Through you, Chair, I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid.
Could you get back to me on it?
Yeah.
Thanks. And my glib political point is that the author of this report clearly thinks that executive made a decision in November, because the table at 5.3 says the November executive meeting approved the sale of capital assets owned by the council. End of glib political point.
Well spotted. I've got another question, if I may. At the bottom of page 246, it talks about clients being placed in externally commissioned beds costing more. But there was a quote from Councillor Dillon in the newspaper last week. I mean, whether we can take that as read or not, I don't know. But he did say that it would actually save us £400 a week per patient if we were to move them from Willow's Edge. Councillor Dillon, if you're still there, you might want to intervene at this point and clarify as well. But can we just get clarity? Are we, by suggesting that we sell Willow's Edge or get someone else to run it for us, is that going to save us money, or is that not going to save us money? Because I'm not clear on that.
So Jeff, is that in the current year? Because that's that
yeah, I suppose that's a bigger question, actually, isn't it?
24-25.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah. Okay, I'll come back to that at a future point then. But yeah, it would be interesting to know exactly. Yeah. Any more questions, comments? Councillor Pemberton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Firstly, I would echo the comments of my Lib Dem colleagues in the room about the work that the Financial Review Panel has done to bring down some of the overspend. I've heard stories of them being sat in this council chamber actually all day long, literally filing through receipts. That's by the by. Mr. Holmes, we're getting dangerously close to our recommended level of reserves. There's obviously a bit of detail in the report about what could happen next around capital directives and Section 114 notices. You may have answered this question in a previous committee meeting, but can you just talk me through in layman's terms what applying for a capital directive involves? And if you're able to be glib and candid, how worried are you about potentially the next stage of that process if other issues arise? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, through you, Chair. So thanks, Councillor. So on the sort of specifics of applying for a capitalisation directive, actually, Councillor Berwick asked me this one, I think, last week at the Governance Committee. So the sort of process there is that the chief exec would have to write to DLUC, Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, requesting a specific sum. I think before I use the example of £1, so let's say we're after £1. And how that process would work is the request would go in, and the request would then be accompanied by a variety of questions which DLUC have. Example, they want to know what the level of our reserves, earmarked and non-earmarked, were. They'd want to know how we benchmark compared to other councils. DLUC would have actually a lot of this information already. They'd want to have a look at debt levels. They would want to have a look probably at things like sort of commercial property portfolio and other investments that the council has made. That submission would then go in, and then if that looked reasonable, we would get what would be called a minded to decision. So then we'd get, the minister would say, I'm minded to provide West Berks with £1. Then there would be an external review commissioned by DLUC of the council. So people would come into the council, review what we're doing, the historical decisions that have been made, options for the future, etc. And then if that review is satisfactory, that would report back to the minister. If the minister thought that was reasonable, they would then say, OK, there's your £1 West Berks. And that report is then made public. So probably the most recent one was Bournemouth, Christchurch and Pool's report. If you just sort of Google that, that is publicly available. So that's kind of the process around capitalisation directive. How close are we to that? Certainly at Q2 compared to Q1, we are clearly in a better position. But if everything else remained equal, we would still be below the minimum level of reserves, which was sort of set out in the budget papers. However, we would still have a general fund balance. So we still would have some money for a rainy day, but it would be pretty much half of what we started in the current financial year. Hence why in the revenue budget in the MTFS paper, which went last week, the underlying assumption is an increase in our reserves at least £1 million every single year. As we get to Q3 and see what position we're in, I may well recommend that figure needs to change to then replenish that level of reserve, because I'm clearly really keen to, as quickly as we can, get back to that level. So clearly from this report, we're in a better position forecast at Q2 compared to Q1, but we are still under significant financial pressure. You see the sort of demand pressures that were set out in here and in the paper last week. I'm not expecting any additional funding coming through as a result of kind of the autumn statement in year, and then particularly for next year. We will get a bit onto next year, but we'll get the local government finance settlement at some point before Christmas Eve, and that will then inform things into the future, which clearly then has an impact on our current year position as well.
Thank you. Let's hope that Santa is kind to us then, if we're going to get that before Christmas. Any other comments, questions on this? No. Okay, so this is just to note. Thank you very much indeed for that, Mr. Holmes. Right, on to health scrutiny. Health Scrutiny Committee has not met since we last met, so there's no update from Councillor Vickers about that. However, we do have a task and finish group which is looking at healthcare on new developments, which I am chairing, and that is essentially a subcommittee of the Health Scrutiny Commission. Just so that members are aware, because I don't think anybody in this meeting is on that task group. The scope of the review basically includes the assessment of the health needs of a local population and how future primary care and public healthcare services are planned with consideration for housing growth and demographic changes, clarity around planning policy and planning consultations with key stakeholders, reviewing a proposed health impact assessment policy, and greater understanding of how primary care services for new developments are commissioned. So we did have a couple of meetings before the election. The membership of that task and finish group has changed since then, and we've had one meeting since the election, but we have 3 substantial meetings coming up where we will be looking at those aspects of the task and finish terms of reference. So that is just to update you on that. Any questions or comments on that? No, okay. Thank you. So appointment of task and finish groups. Just to advise you, initially Councillor Bowick was going to be on the COVID task and finish group. And then we discussed, and very kindly had offered to chair it as well. But then we established that we shouldn't have members who had previously been on the exec when we were looking back and scrutinising something that they had been in charge of. So thank you for offering. We now have Paul Kander on the group. So we have met once and we will be meeting again in December, and Councillor Dick is chairing that. So thank you to him. I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Not really.
No.
No, not really. It's progressing well, and we're getting very good guidance from the gentleman on your left. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And that's it for task and finish groups, I think, for that particular item. Great. Item 12, Monks Lane. As you will recall, back at our meeting in June, we asked for some costings for Monks Lane, and those went to executive on the 2nd of November, I think. And we have a paper this evening, item 12, which outlines the costs that we asked for. Hopefully you've had a chance to read this. Do you have any questions or comments on this? No, deafening silence, okay. Right, I would like to propose that we do a further piece of work on this. The Section 151 officer said to us before that executive meeting that we should wait for the costings to go to executive, consider them here this evening, and then the option would be open to us to do a further piece of work if we so wished. So if members will indulge me, I will outline my thinking for why I think I would like to have a task and finish about this for the following reasons. One, value for money. We do find ourselves in a challenging situation. The money for the project has been reprofiled forward, so it hasn't been put back into the pot to be spent on other things. It has actually been reprofiled. So that begs the question, what is that money going to be used for if the Monks Lane option is no longer on the table? There's also the issue of project management. Some members may be aware that back in the previous administration, there was a task and finish group looking at the London Road Industrial Estate, and that reported back after a mammoth 16 meetings back in July 2020, and it came up with a number of proposals about how the council could improve its project management, so processes, costs thereof, etc. Obviously, again, project management is a big issue. How much money do we spend on project management? What lessons can we learn from that going forwards with the current challenges? Another item I think we ought to look at is the advice that we received at various committee meetings. There seemed to be inconsistencies in what was going to planning and executive in parallel. I realise that we can't revisit planning application decisions at committees, but the point I would make is that advice that was forthcoming did seem to be contradictory, and how might we avoid that situation in future? Also, how meaningful are our strategies? We've got a playing pitch strategy, and the number one priority in it is Faraday Road. Now, I don't expect everyone to have read this in great detail, but it has consistently been referred to, the number one priority as being Monks Lane, and that has been referred to by members and by officers at many, many meetings. But it is Faraday Road. And one has to ask the question, if it's Monks Lane is the number one priority, then it's a replacement for Faraday Road, because the number one priority in the playing pitch strategy is Faraday Road. So that then begs the question, why were we told at district planning and in the High Court that it was not a replacement? So I'm not proposing that we go over this in great detail and we rake up every, dot and comma, but I would be very keen to have a focus on what key lessons can be learned, and to do that relatively rapidly. I'm not suggesting 16 meetings, I can assure you of that. So for example, and I'll finish on this point, should it be the case that members of executive can be on a planning committee when the applicant is the council? that was the case previously, I would ask that question as something we should reflect on. Should it be possible for a member of the executive who is part of a board of people making decisions to be on a planning committee when the applicant is West Berkshire, which was the case with Monks Lane? So I'll leave it there and open that up for comments. Councillor McKinnon.
Thanks, Chairman. I've got no problem with your suggestion about the task and finish group to look into those things whatsoever. So that's absolutely fine with us. Just on your question of the replacement, is it a replacement or isn't? I think one of the things the task and finish group will find is that there's actually two replacements. There's a replacement in planning terms, and then there's a replacement in council strategic terms. This will be something that I'm sure the group will look into and will take advice on, but no, fine with us.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McKinnon. Any other comments? Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, actually, I mean, personally, I don't think that there's, given that the administration has changed, the priorities have changed. The priorities, the new priorities of the new administration are clear, and have, and have already started to be delivered. For example, with the first game of football being played at Faraday Road a week or two ago, I'm not sure that it's really worth all of the time and effort for this scrutiny committee to investigate this further with the task and finish group. There were, as you say, Councillor Culver, there were, there's been a lot of investigation into project management in the past, and perhaps previous shortcomings, and hopefully lessons learned from that, which are still relevant and should still be used by the council in all future projects. So as long as that's happening, then I think that should be fine. So yeah, personally, I'm not minded to for this committee to spend a lot of time on that. I'm sure we could probably scrutinise other things that are more over which we would have more control, and the council would have more control, because we would be scrutinising the new administration.
Councillor Matharaj.
Thank you, Chair. Just pretty much echo what Eric has said, Councillor Eric has said. Regarding your point on the project management costs, I want to point out to the previous report on page 259, it starts with all the services. There is a review of all the services above 500, even £500. So if this would have been implemented, this strategy of reviewing the spend and making sure is that the prudent application of thought is applied, where we are spending on project management consultancies, then we would have avoided it. So the lesson has been learned and it's been put into action on a daily basis. So I'm kind of seeing the intention, but it's kind of already implemented, and we have to comment for that, and we need to see the results. And if something like this comes up in the future, we would definitely go back to this and point out if there is anything spent like this on the future project management cost. But until that time, I think we will leave this at rest, and then allow the executive and the team to progress further in terms of their strategy, not looking at this issue which has been laid to rest. And we are making progress in terms of Newbury football is happening and is happened. So that's what we should be looking at, futuristic and growth oriented, not looking at the old issue, in my view. That's my view as well, personally.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Bowick.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Pattendon says that the council's priorities have changed. They haven't really changed. The 5 priorities remain more or less, as Councillor McKinnon said, you used a thesaurus on our previous priorities and came up with a matching set. You're talking about campaign promises that you made, and you might think that everything's going swimmingly now, but I think we're hit. Councillor Dillon has declared, and you all agree with him, that we should scrutiny, that he welcomes scrutiny. So I don't understand why, in this case, a substantial piece of work, a huge change in direction in terms of tactics, why we shouldn't scrutinise it. That's what we're here for, isn't it?
Councillor Reid.
So yes, as a programme manager for part of my professional life, I think it's always important to look at lessons learned and best practice, and to see if best practice was applied in this particular case and whether we missed any previous lessons learned. I think if we can effort box it, time box it, cost box it, whatever's necessary to do it, if we can go in there with a quick template, check against those, get the questions out, turned around quickly, then I think it's it then becomes whether it was a run in particular good fashion, or whether we missed some best practice and it just needs a little bit more further training or re-emphasis when we're making future decisions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McKinnon.
Yeah, I think Councillor Reid makes a good point there. I think it's very important. I think all members of this commission should remember that we are not here to do the party political thing in these evenings. I know sometimes it's tempting and we can't quite help ourselves, but we're not here to do that. And we've seen a couple of instances tonight where perhaps we've fallen short on that. I'm very surprised to hear some of our colleagues opposite wanting just to sweep this under the carpet and forget about it. It's the same staff members, it's the same officers who are with the council now as they were before me. And, we on the Conservative side, we were, of course, very keen on this sports hub, and we still are, but that's done now. But in terms of how that project was managed and how lessons can be learned for the future, I think it's crazy not to look at that, and particularly as Councillor Reid says, as long as we don't spend 2 years doing it. So I fully support the Fast and Finish group to scrutinise our previous work, Chairman. I don't see why you wouldn't.
Thank you. Councillor Amtharaj.
Sorry, we're not implying that we should not be scrutinizing aspects, the decisions of the executive or even the officers. What I'm trying to say is very precisely 2 points. The mismanagement or the spend on the project management consultancy and all those ones has been acknowledged. I'm not sure whether we are going back and seeing there is going to be fact-finding exercise. No, let me finish there. What I'm trying to imply was the lesson learned from that mishap, I would say, spend on project management cost, which is going to cost to the taxpayer, is going to be looking at by the executive. It's already been looked at. Every spend on the consultancies or staffing and everything is being looked at. And I'm proposing, or I believe that we should be scrutinizing those aspects when it has happened after this incident. It's just lessons learned exercise. Yes, you can do that, but you will come out with the same conclusion to say, for example, the recommendation would be to say, review the spending for any project management cost, which is already happening. So we should be spending our time to scrutinize more important aspects of this decisions coming forward, which we are going to have a full pack on. We are only concerned that it's like we are diverting our time to some aspects where it's already happening. That's the only point. It's not just to any political pointing on this one. It's not scoring on anything. It's just I'm pointing out it's already happening. That's the only thing.
Thank you. Councillor Pattenden and then Councillor Bowick.
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, if it was just for purely political reasons, if that was the only reason for looking into this with a task and finish group, I would say, yeah, absolutely, go ahead. But I think that's not the purpose of what we're doing in the Scrutiny Commission. So therefore, I really don't think it's necessary for us to scrutinise a decision. Well, I mean, it's obvious. I disagreed with the idea of the sports hub in the first place. I think that the new strategy that we've got and that's still in progress is a much better use. It's going to give much better services to the public and much better way to spend the money. Do I think that it's worth us spending time on something that is now defunct? No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bowick.
Thank you. Councillor Amtharaj and Councillor Pattenden seem to think that everything's fine, that we've learned everything there is to know. Well, where are these lessons? Where are these lessons written down? Until we look at the decisions and the procedures and the processes in a systematic way, we won't learn anything. And it's not just about cost control, Councillor. It's much more fundamental than that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, just to clarify, there is this issue about whether we should separate powers between executive and planning. And also there is going to be a stage 2 review of the playing pitch strategy as well. And the money for Monks Lane has been reprofiled forwards. So there are elements that are extant. So I'm by no means proposing that we just rake over ancient history. You know, because we, as Councillor Pattenden rightly says, we do have a lot of stuff on our agenda that needs our attention. So just to clarify that there are ongoing issues, I think it's not just a case of what's happened in the past. Any other comments on that? Can I propose we have a vote on this? I'd like to propose that we have a task and finish group on Monks Lane. Would anyone like to second that? Councillor Reid, can we have a vote on that, please? Everyone in favour? Thank you very much, colleagues. Did you get a note of that, colleagues? Yeah, thank you. I beg your pardon, Eric. Sorry. Yes. Yes. Anyone against? Thank you. Thank you. I do apologise. Right. Okay. Thank you very much for that. Item 13 on Thames Water. My computer's decided to shut down. I don't, oh, they both are. Okay. So, I think we had a really good meeting on the 11th of October. We had lots of questions from members, from backbenchers, from members of the public, etc. I have kept in contact with a number of the people who came along and spoke at that. So the East Garston Flood Warden, with Stuart Gawley, who is now the portfolio holder for the environment, who's trying to sort out some things in his ward. I have done a written update. I don't propose that I go through that in great detail now, but I will include that in the minutes if that's okay. There's a list of bullet points basically of things that have happened since the meeting, because I'm quite keen that we have an ongoing discussion. We don't just say we've met with Thames Water and the Environment Agency and then forget about it for another year. We actually follow up on various things. So there are the problems that were raised by the flood warden from East Garston, for example, about tankers going in last year to take sewage away. That problem has started again this winter already. As we know, we had an apology from Thames Water regarding some of the sewage that was released into the Pang, and that was minuted that they gave us that apology. And as I mentioned, Councillor Gawley is now in discussion with Thames Water and the Council and the Environment Agency about the London Road Industrial Estate and the Northbrook Stream. So there are issues there around surface water drainage and also pollution. So they're going to be having that conversation. Councillor Dicker's taken up further questions with Thames Water. So I've just got a bit of a summary there. And also Thames Water asked us if we had any regular reporting metrics that we would like from them. And some of the members of the public who spoke at the meeting gave me some feedback about that, which Stuart Gawley has sent on to Thames Water. So hopefully we will get some more metrics in the future. Councillor Bowick.
Quick observation. I've seen Bowsers going into the pumping station in Brimpton recently.
Right.
Same story.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
And we've already had flooding in Stanford Dingley, so the sewage repairs didn't exactly work, so flooding there as well.
Okay. Have either of you had any contact with Thames Water since the meeting with Richard Aylard? Because he seems to be, I know he hasn't responded to you. Yeah. He has been fairly responsive to people is the impression I'm getting. Probably people don't necessarily get the answer they want, but he is trying, I think.
Actually getting a response from a lady called Julie Moulton, who I believe is in sort of the EEO office, I think.
Right. Okay. And I know Karen Nelson, who was at the meeting, has been out to the LRIE Northbrook Stream area to have a look as well. So, yeah, obviously things are not moving as quickly as we'd like, but I would urge people to get in touch directly with Richard Aylard and Karen Nelson. And if you don't have their contact details, let us know, and Gordon or I can make sure that you've got those. So I'll make sure that that goes into the minutes. Thank you very much indeed. So item 14, executive forward plan. Does anyone have any comments on this? In silence. I think a lot of the things on here we've got covered off, to be honest. I think the waste strategy's on here. We've got that on our agenda for March. Various other things have come to council and executive already. So I don't know if there's anything on there that you think we need to be looking at in our forward plan, Councillor McKinnon.
No, just a question. I don't know if I've missed it, but on page 358, there's something in there which is response to Rwanda motion. I don't remember a motion about Rwanda. Can anyone remind me what that was? Unless I missed it.
Good question. Mr. Holmes.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think it came through from previous Councillor Masters to full council in last year.
Okay.
All right. Okay.
I'll have to go and search that out then. Okay.
I think it was May time off the top of my head.
Okay, thank
Right,
you.
thank you.
You've got a better memory than I have, Mr. Holmes. Thank you for that. Excuse me. Yeah, okay. Any other comments on that? Okay, thank you. So moving on, item 15, Scrutiny Commission Work Programme. As members will recall, we had the meeting at Shaw House a couple or 3 months ago, where we were present along with members of the executive and also officers, and we looked at a long list of topics to go through in the future. And then we had a look at the so-called paper methodology, which Mr. Oliver shared with us, so that we can look at prioritising the issues that we want to discuss in the future. And Mr. Oliver has very helpfully gone through that process and included all of those papers under item 13. Recruitment of foster carers, we've already covered this evening. Budget scrutiny, we have got a special meeting of scrutiny in February, as you will be aware. Parking strategy, the notes on here say it's been confirmed parking strategy will go to executive for approval on the 8th of February, which will be before the next available Scrutiny Commission meeting on the 27th of February. Therefore, it is recommended that this should not be included in the work programme. So as I go along, please do interrupt me, disagree, agree, whatever. We have asset review on the list. Percentage of children on free school meals who achieve a good level of development at foundation level. Early years capacity wraparound care. This is something that isn't due to come in until September 2026. So I would suggest that's something that we've probably got a bit more time to look at. And indeed, we would expect a general election sometime before the 31st of January 2025. And that may or may not have an impact on that policy. So that's one we probably don't need to do very quickly. Environment strategy, operational review. We do get updates about the environment strategy at executive and council. So I don't know whether there's anything additional that we would want to do around that, but we could also bring that back as an item at an ordinary meeting. Royal Mail, Mr. Oliver shared with you an email that he had from Ofcom about the Royal Mail difficulties, which hopefully you've all had a chance to look at. And then the broken market for children's social care placements. Recruitment and retention. Housing. Library service. And retendering of bus services and cultural heritage strategy. So just reading that out for the benefit of the public, if more than anything, just so that you know what we're looking at. Do members have any comments on any of those? Do you have views on what we ought to prioritise to come to an ordinary meeting or to have a task and finish group about? Councillor Reid.
I was just wondering, was there any change in the scoring from the initial document that was sent out? And it's just, if you could highlight what those changes and scores were.
Okay. Comment, Mr. Oliver?
There were changes. I think I made them actually in response to what you put forward. I can't remember which ones it was, but a couple of them swapped around. But it didn't make a great deal of difference. But I can't remember offhand which ones it was.
That's all right. I'll take it offline and just.
Councillor McKinnon.
Yeah, just in terms of priorities, waste and housing are two that jump off the page to me, but other opinions I'm sure are available and valid.
Well, waste's on our agenda for March, yeah, but housing definitely. I think housing is at the root cause of a lot of problems that we face, yeah.
Yeah, bus service is one. I was pointing out that that's priority public interest one, which is
Yeah.
good. Yeah, active travel. Yeah.
Okay, councillor Pemberton.
Yeah, thanks. I think the one about percentage of children on free school meals is probably a good one to think about at some stage. I know West Berkshire Council does struggle on some of those metrics for a particularly affluent area. I know I've got a vested interest. Some of the other topics relating to children we've either covered off or, as you rightly say, are not going to be an issue for a few years. So I'd quite like to see that one there if we can.
Chairman, through you, I thought we'd agreed that because we had a discussion, didn't we? And there was a number of us who felt very strongly about that. I am one, and I believe you were one as well, and may still be.
We're going to have a task and finish about that, yeah. Yeah, do we need to have a vote on that though? Because I've got here task or finish group or dedicated meeting. We haven't had a vote on that yet, have we? No, okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
On the early years capacity wraparound care, just to expand that a bit and to declare interest, my wife is an early years manager in Councillor Bowett's area ward. There is concern, even though it's going to be very generous provisions actually from this current government, that actually that the results may be that there will be an acceleration of some of the trust early years, which is preschools, which tend to be not the full wraparound, but holiday period. They can't cover, may accelerate even more rapid closure. 5,000 we lost last year. I don't think we can really afford, certainly in some of the rural areas, closure of even more of those, considering the big nurseries tend to be, a good car journey away, and that tends to be for the more middle class and wealthy of us, rather than people that are on minimum wages.
Thank you. Any other comments from anyone? No? Okay, so if we want to, we've got waste on the agenda for March. So that's our next meeting, isn't it, apart from the finance one? Yeah, okay. So do we want to have a think about what we could have as single items on the same meeting? Because it's not going to be a meeting just about waste, is it? No, okay. So in terms of single items, I've got here under percentage of children on free school meals, it says would require task and finish group or dedicated meeting. So
Environment strategy in February.
Oh, okay, so we've got environment strategy in February. So we've got the finance meeting in early February, then we've got the environment strategy operation review on the 27th of February. Is that a single item, or is that? At the moment, that's a single item. And then we've got a meeting on the 21st of May, which has got the waste strategy. And the library service, and an update from COVID task and finish. So that's when we're due to report back, isn't it? Or not, depending on how we get through it. Okay, so we do still have some capacity, I think, maybe on that meeting in March to put in something else. In terms of the percentage of children on free school meals, do we think we'd like to have a task and finish about this, or a dedicated meeting? Bearing in mind we've already got a dedicated meeting about the environment and one about the budget as well. How urgent do we want to look at this issue? Yes.
Sure.
Councillor Dick.
One of the issues is about results, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if we've got a very crowded program, do we want to wait for the autumn? I don't like to wait for everything, but do we have to press it data? Just as well.
Okay. Councillor Matharaj.
Sorry, do you mean autumn for the next government to come in, or what do you mean by autumn?
We're talking about doing some work on the percentage of children on free school meals who do well or otherwise at school. And one of the key measures is outcomes, results.
So
it's not the only one.
So why autumn? I'm just
because
curious.
People take examinations in the summer, and the results are published. Sorry.
Okay, it's the possibility of the.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear.
Okay. No, free school meals is important, but what I wanted to highlight is it the stats we need to get first, and then have a deliberation on that one. So how soon we can get the stats from there? Is it going to be possible by March, or is it going to be the new school year.
Yeah, I don't know if we've got any officers with us at this point who would be able to comment. Mr. Coe, have you got any?
I suppose just to directly connect to, so the data in terms of children who are on free school meals, that's easily accessible data. The point is, how did they do in their exams in the summer? That will be known in the autumn.
Okay, right. So we'll push that back then till next autumn. Okay, thank you, Mr. Coe, for that clarification. And Councillor Dick for that suggestion. Right, so we'll do that in autumn 24. The early years wraparound care, are we happy to leave that for the time being, just because it's a bit further down the line? September 26.
I think again it will be an outcome one because we don't know what the impacts of the wraparound care is at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we've got waste and environment. Royal Mail's covered off by their own Ofcom investigation. Broken market for children's social care placements. It says here a complex issue that would require a task and finish group. Now, we have a number of task and finish groups on the table at the moment. Is this something that we would want to look into soon or further down the line, do we think? Bear in mind, we can come back to this item at future meetings and keep a rolling eye on this.
Sorry, Chairman, can you just repeat exactly what it is?
Yes, broken market for children's social care placements. So rising demand and lack of availability leading to high cost. Actually, I suppose we've covered some of this off in the fostering item tonight. So, yeah, I don't know if there's anything else. Councillor Bowick.
I mentioned one of the key, one of the recommendations that I really supported was the participation in the regional fostering partnership.
Yeah,
that's aimed at that initiative is aimed at directly at this fixing this problem. So maybe we should see how things unfold.
Okay. Any other points on that? No. Okay. Recruitment and retention. This could be handled as a single item or a dedicated meeting. We know we've got challenges with recruitment and we've got the panel that's looking at whether or not we should recruit to vacant posts. There is also the retention issue. I think this was raised by officers at Shaw House. And obviously, if retention is not very good, that's going to compound our challenges with recruitment. So I wonder if that's something that we could bring as a single item. I would be quite keen to find out a bit more from Personnel Committee about what kind of information they are gathering regarding retention. So exit interviews, for example, what kind of data is being gathered about the reason for people leaving? I know people talk anecdotally about how we can't compete with other councils on salary or people go to the private sector or whatever, but I'm sure the picture is more nuanced and complex than that. So if members are happy, maybe we could have a single item on that in the future. Maybe we could schedule that for March.
End of Feb. Yep.
End of Feb. Great. Thank you.
Chair, I wonder if we could, because we always compare ourselves against other councils, but actually we're also competing in a bigger market with commercial companies. And I know there are a number of commercial companies in the area who have got turnover of staff even higher than 15%. So I wonder if we could get some comparison with, similar paying organisations. Obviously not an investment bank, but maybe something that's a bit more appropriate.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Reid, for that. Housing, we've agreed that that would be a good thing to look at, and it's very complex and it would need a task and finish group. Do we want to decide now that we would like to have a task and finish group on that and an idea of when we would want to begin that process? Any views on that? We can get it underway or we can say, let's look at it again in February and think about a date. Councillor Pemberton, I saw your hand.
Yeah, the only general comment I was going to make is, well, almost certainly won't cover that off in a single meeting. So
it'd be task and finish.
Almost certainly. In terms of the timescale, I'm quite relaxed, and dare I say, I'd probably be willing to put myself forward to do a bit of work on that as well.
Great, thank you, Councillor Matharaj.
So thanks, Chair. I'm also willing to be part of that because there is a lot of complaints from the ward constituents that they can see that the servicing costs have increased, particularly from Sovereign. So although it's at affordable homes, and then it kind of like possibility of like having that review to see like how those increases are being kind of goes unchecked or something like that. And then a lot of vacant properties or how the servicing of those properties are happening and people are leaving that because of lack of servicing and all this stuff. So the quality issues around those ones, I'm pretty sure that's being reviewed, but it's kind of goes unchecked sometimes, isn't it? So yeah, I'm happy to be part of the task group if it's
brilliant. Thank you. Yes, I'm aware that there are some social housing units that have been empty in my ward for a long time, and there are people desperately in need of housing. So that is an issue. I mean, obviously, one of the challenges we've got is Sovereign is not under our purview, so we have less traction with them than we would have done when the council housing was in-house. Councillor McKinnon.
Yeah, no, it's really quite exciting to see all of this work that we're going to be doing. I was just going to say, we just need to be mindful in terms of the timing of this one. I think we've already got a few task and finish groups on the go. So it might be an idea just to get an idea from Gordon about officer time and what's feasible. But yeah, as soon as reasonably practical would be great, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Well, maybe it's something that we could embark on. Sorry, yes.
Can I just say, I mean, Sovereign, I mean, they're getting slagged off, but Sovereign are the best of a bad bunch. There's a lot more worse housing associations out there than Sovereign.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, if we're due to conclude the COVID one in May, that will then be off the books. So maybe that's something we could start in May. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. That puts extra pressure on us to get on with the COVID one. Okay, library service. Maybe best to consider this once the 24-25 budget has been confirmed. It says here, are people happy to? Yeah, great. Bus service, Councillor Amatharas, you were quite keen on this one.
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. Like in terms of bus services, I can notice in our rural wards, partial rural wards and some of the most rural wards, there's a lack of in terms of connectivity to the town centres, and then it's just people, as instance, for example, I've been told lack of bus service and parking in Newbury, they're going to Wantage, for example, in our ward. So just to give an example, that kind of like a theme of like having kind of like I wouldn't call an apathy, but in terms of not having funding for the bus service and not recognizing the need of people traveling to town centers after COVID especially is kind of enabling the disadvantaged people, particularly the elderly. So I'm keen to get on this one to look at aspects of those connectivity of bus services to town from rural wards. That's I kind of think we can narrow down, and then we can work on further on the bus services. If we can just, if you allow us to work on those particularly rural wards, connectivity from rural wards, including yours, say it's like to the town, so we can focus on that particular aspect.
Thank you. I do note here that it says Transport Advisory Group would feed into the bus strategy, so there would be an element of duplication. Do we know the timetable for the Transport Advisory Group looking at this particular issue? When might we could have a single item on an agenda that fits in a timely fashion with other groups that are looking at this?
I would need to just have a word with colleagues just to find out when TAG is actually looking at things. I don't have that information to hand.
Okay, thank you. So if we look at that and then fit something in that works well with that, Councillor Bowick.
Thank you, Chairman. There's a certain sum of money, £7.3 million of savings that are undefined by the administration, but may well include areas like buses. I don't know. We have no visibility of that, but that's a lot of services, and it might be for some of these things we might need to kind of wait until we see more. See more of what's in that envelope before we kind of embark on, or that would inform any future scrutiny.
Yep, thank you for that. Mr. Oliver's just pointed out to me that the West Berkshire bus survey results were due on the 30th of October. So we haven't seen them yet. So that would give us some more evidence to have a look at. Yeah, okay. Are you able to investigate what's happened with that, Mr. Oliver? Thank you very much. Good. Okay. So we'll have that as a single item at some point then. And then last but not least, cultural heritage strategy delivery plan. This had a lower scoring on the paper methodology, but we could handle that as a single item if we so wished. Any views on that? Councillor Pattenden.
I don't know, because I'm not in a position to say, but this, this might be a strategy that changes. So I guess we might want to wait to see if there's a new one, and if so, then we would review it. So potentially not a priority at this time, I would suggest.
Okay. Okay. Right. That brings us to the end of that list. Has anyone got any comments? Do you think anything's been missed out? No? Okay, great. Thank you for that. That brings us to the end of our meeting, I believe. We finished earlier than I thought we were going to, actually. Thank you. No part two needed, indeed. So thank you very much indeed to members, to officers who came along this evening to give us presentations, answer questions, etc. Thank you for all the scrutiny you've done this evening, and I will call this meeting to a close. Thank you.